What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is July 4th, 2026. Happy 250 years of working class struggle. Working class struggle against the forces of imperialism, racism, and of course exploitative capitalism. And we hope for another 250 years of working class struggle against the forces that seek to oppress people. Maybe not another 250 years, because eventually we want this evil empire to end. We want the American nightmare to end. So I hope that we are able to overcome this nightmare soon. But as we continue to live under the tyranny of the United States and its allies, I hope that we still remain with enough strength and courage to confront the evils that are in front of us. But I digress. Welcome back to Book React 22, where we are reading our 22nd book in our Book to React series from cover to cover, open source book club, open source library for everybody to join. We are nearing the end of the history of the Russian Revolution, written by Leon Trotsky. We only have about four more chapters to go. So we're going to finish this by Wednesday, inshallah, next week. For today's episode 44, we will read chapter 43, The Conquest of the Capital. For the previous chapters that we've read so far, Trotsky has been going over essentially how the Bolsheviks were tearing down the legitimacy of the former regime slowly, bit by bit, by replacing the institutions. Of course, with the Soviet, the workers' councils, they were able to replace, the landed gentry. They were able to replace the bosses in the factory. They were able to replace the bourgeois mayors and set up a more democratic system. And also with the Military Revolutionary Council, the Red Guard, and also the defected soldiers that were joining their ranks, they were able to form a new military force to defend the revolution. So now we are finally at the part that is probably the most famous aspect of the Russian Revolution, which is the October storming of the castle, the Winter Palace. And I think in this chapter, Trotsky is going to do something that we don't expect. He's going to turn it on its head. Remember, the most famous quote we should probably take from Trotsky is that the nature of man is naturally conservative. The nature of man is naturally conservative. The nature of man is naturally conservative. Most people don't want radical change. Most people want stability. Most people don't want things to just overturn overnight. And when things do happen like that, life goes on. As we, see in our own lifetime, when COVID happened, people still had sex. People still went on dates. People still, went to work. People still, went to the store to buy donuts with a mask on or without one, like my father did. But I digress. Most people are naturally conservative, and I believe in this chapter, Trotsky is going to show us that the wild image that we have of the storming of the Winter Palace, the October Revolution, is actually not as radical as we think. It was actually more of a slow, final ripping off of the Band-Aid, or the last peeling of the paint of the old wall to reveal that something new will be placed in its stead. So I'm looking forward to reading this. We have both live streams going at the same time. In the horizontal live stream, we do not have on slow mode. I repeat, in the horizontal live stream, we do not have on slow mode. So if you want to come in and spam and just say a bunch of wild, crazy shit, you have to go into the horizontal live stream where you can see the text on stream. The horizontal live stream is the more educated section, though. So most likely you're going to be met with instant clapping. You're going to get your ass clapped up real quick. My commissars are everywhere. They're ready to clap a reactionary very quickly. So if you want to spam, once again, go into the horizontal live stream. The vertical live stream is open as well. It's on slow mode. You have to send a message every 10 seconds if you want to say something. That's because I want to be able to reply to the comments that come in. That does not guarantee that you will be able to stay in the comment section. But that at least gives me a chance to read everything y'all are saying, because yesterday y'all were going absolutely crazy. So I'm looking forward to reacting to all comments related to the chapter, the topic, the questions I will pose. I will pose one question to begin our live stream. When you think of the October Revolution of 1917, what comes to mind? How do you envision it? How do you imagine it? How are you taught about it? I would like to know how you think about it. I have not read this chapter before. I've just, did some research and summary of it real quick before coming on live. But yeah, I'm very interested to see how Trotsky details the October Revolution. But I would like to know, how do you think of the October Revolution of 1917? Without further ado, let's jump into it. Chapter 43, the conquest of the capital. All is changed, and yet all remains as before. The revolution has shaken the country, deepened the split, frightened some, embittered others, but not yet wiped out a thing or replaced it. Imperial St. Petersburg seems drowned in a sleepy lethargy rather than dead. The revolution has stuck little red flags in the hands of the cast iron monuments of the monarchy. Great red streamers are hanging down the fronts of the government buildings, but the Winter Palace, the ministries, the headquarters seem to be living a life entirely apart from those red banners, tolerably faded, moreover, by the autumn rains. The two-headed eagles with the scepter of empire have been torn down where possible, but oftener draped or hastily painted over. They seem to be lurking there. All the old Russia is lurking, its jaws set in rage. The slight figures of the militiamen at the street corners remind one of the revolution that has wiped out the old pharaohs. The slight figures of the militiamen at the street corners remind one of the revolution that has wiped out the old pharaohs who used to stand there like live monuments. Moreover, Russia has now for almost 2 months been called a republic, and the Tsar's family is in Tobolsk. Yes, the February whirlwind has left its traces, but the Tsarist generals remain generals. The senators senatorialize. The privy councilors defend their dignity. The table of precedence is still in effect. Colored hatbands and cockades recall the bureaucratic hierarchy. Yellow buttons with an eagle still distinguish the student. And yet, more important, the landlords are still landlords. No end of the war is in sight. The Allied diplomats are impudently jerking official Russia along on a string. All remains as before, and yet nobody knows himself. The aristocratic quarters feel that they have been moved out into the backyard. The quarters of the liberal bourgeoisie have moved nearer the aristocracy. From being a patriotic myth, the Russian people have become an awful reality. Everything is billowing and shaking underfoot. Mysticism flares up with sharpened force in those circles that not long ago were making fun of the superstitions of the monarchy. Brokers, lawyers, ballerinas are cursing the oncoming eclipse of public morals. Faith in the Constituent Assembly is evaporating day by day. Gorky, in his newspaper, is prophesizing the approaching downfall of culture. The flight from raving and hungry Petrograd to a more peaceful and well-fed province on the increase ever since the July days now becomes a stampede. Respectable families who have not succeeded in getting away from the capital try in vain to insulate themselves from reality behind stone wall and under iron roof. But the echoes of the storm penetrate on every side, through the market, where everything is getting dear and nothing to be had, through the respectable press, which is turning into one yelp of hatred and fear, through the seething streets, where from time to time shootings are to be heard under the windows, and finally through the back entrance, through the servants, who are no longer humbly submissive. It is here that the revolution strikes home to the most sensitive spot. That obstreperousness of the household slaves destroys utterly the stability of the family regime. I have to look up that word. I have never seen that word before. Obstreperousness. Obstreperousness. Okay, that I rarely look up words because I can often glean what they mean from context clues. But this is the state or quality of being boisterously noisy, defiant, and stubbornly resistant to the control or restraint. Very interesting. So what Trotsky is saying here, What Trotsky is saying here is that, everything in Russia pretty much stayed the same. It was quiet. The senators were still senators. Even though the Tsar was locked up, most people were still going about their daily lives. But there were echoes, or there's hints that a revolution had come. For example, now Russia is officially a republic, in name at least. And now there's red banners hanging from certain people's windows and houses, and red guards standing on the corner instead of the old police. But generally, some things are generally the same, except in the houses of rich people, where now their domestic servants are being, obstreperous. Obstreperous. That's our new word for today. Obstreperous. And obstreperousness is essentially being defiant. Okay, let's continue here. Nevertheless, the everyday routine defends itself with all its might. Schoolboys are still studying the old textbooks, functionaries drawing up the same useless papers, poets scribbling the verses that nobody reads, nurses telling the fairy tales about Ivan Tsarevich. The nobilities and merchants' daughters coming in from the provinces are studying music or hunting husbands. The same old cannon on the wall of the Peter and Paul fortress continues to announce the noon hour. A new ballet is going on in the Mariinsky Theater, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Tereshchenko, stronger on choreography than diplomacy, finds time, we may assume, to admire the steel toes of the ballerina and thus demonstrate the stability of the regime. The remnants of the old banquet are still very plentiful, and everything can be had for big money. The guard officers still click their spurs accurately and go after adventures. Wild parties are in progress in the private dining rooms of expensive restaurants. The shutting off of the electric lights at midnight does not prevent the flourishing of gambling clubs where champagne sparkles by candlelight, where illustrious percolators or peculators swindle no less illustrious German spies, where monarchist conspirators call the bets of Semitic smugglers, and where the astronomical figures of the stakes played for indicate both the scale of debauchery and the scale of inflation. So very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. He's essentially saying it's like Star Wars. Remember on Tatooine, when you went to the pub and all the different aliens were there gambling, drinking, playing music. And then a white man, Han Solo, walks in there and just shoots a brown alien. You know what I mean? That shit was essentially Star Wars. Shit was essentially Tatooine. The world was going by. People were continuing to live their lives, even though everything was upside down. At least politically in Russia, and the world was about to change forever. Once again, what does Trotsky tell us? The nature of man is conservative. Going here, Plato says, yo, bro. Shout out to Plato, 1, 2, 3. But Plato, do not call me bro. I am not your brother, and I will never be your brother. You call me comrade on this channel, or Simon, or something else entirely, as long as it's respectful. But do not call me bro, because bro, number one, most likely you're a white man saying bro, and you have no idea that bro is a black American term that was started by soldiers in Vietnam who were creating code language to talk amongst themselves out of the earshot of racist white generals and sergeants. But I digress. Do not call me bro. I am Comrade Simon, or just Simon. Period. Okay? Do you think Trump can still cling to power in 2028? He said he has a plan. I do think it's possible, and I do not care. We want more reactionaries. We want the contradictions of this decadent, imperialist, white supremacist society to become more and more exposed, so that way we can have the working class reach its historical destiny through the agitation of our propaganda and also the contradictions created by this decadent society that continue to want to see working people suffer. So if Trump gets a third term, I don't care. We're still going to do the work of raising class consciousness, trying to organize and bring the working class people together. Okay? All right. Nelson is over here complaining about the World Cup. All right. Nelson is over here complaining about the World Cup. We do not care about the World Cup. To me, the World Cup is a money laundering organization or a money laundering event where bad bitches from around the world get flown out to Qatar, to LA, to Mexico City, to Paris, wherever the fuck they have the World Cup, to sell pussy to rich niggas. That's what the World Cup is. I don't give a fuck about Messi, Ronaldo. I don't give a fuck. Who the fuck watches soccer? I'm going to keep it real. The only thing I still keep true to my American roots is that soccer is stupid. Soccer is stupid. Soccer is not a manly sport. Look at me. I play with my feet. Nah, fuck that. Fuck that. Jump on that nigga and kill him like in real football. What the fuck is soccer? Who watches soccer? Come on now. Come on now. We don't watch soccer on this side. We don't watch soccer. We don't talk about soccer. What the fuck is soccer? What the fuck is soccer? It's a pansy game. It's a whole pansy game. Nelson says, how long is this book? We have 4 more chapters to go. And he says that he is listening to podcasts now. That's your choice, your prerogative. But I would argue reading the theory is much better than listening to a podcast. Because the things that I have read in this book, I have not heard any leftist podcaster talk about. Have you heard any leftist podcaster talk about propaganda to soldiers? Have you ever heard any leftist podcaster talk about, the nature of insurrection? Have you ever heard a leftist podcaster talk about the fusion of Marxism with Blankism? No, you probably haven't, and you probably never will, because this is nerd shit. So if you don't like to actually read and you just want to listen to niggas tell you what to think, then go ahead, I guess. All right. So shout out to Right Side Up Penguin. He says, what do you mean by real football? The one with the hands? Yes, I am talking about that. That is real football. That's real football. That is the only element of American reactionaryism I have within me. That soccer is not a real sport. Or, yeah, it's a really stupid sport. Okay, that's the truest thing an American can say, and that's one hardcore belief I do hold. One hardcore belief. Soccer is really dumb. Soccer is really dumb. Okay? I will continue here. But since we have so many people that want to chat it up, when you think about the October Revolution, what comes to your mind? How do you imagine it? How do you think it went down? What were you taught about it? What Marxist podcaster told you about the October Revolution? I digress. Let's continue here. Can it be that a near tram car, run down, dirty, dilatory, draped with clusters of people, leads from this St. Petersburg in its death agony into the workers' quarters, so passionately, intensely alive, with a new hope? Another Star Wars reference. The blue and gold cupola of Smolny Convent announces from afar the headquarters of the insurrection. It is on the edge of the city where the tram line ends, and the Neva describes a sharp turn south, separating the center of the capital from the suburbs. That long gray 3-story building, an educative barrack for the daughters of the nobility, is now the stronghold of the Soviets. Its long echoing corridors seem to have been made for teaching the laws of perspective. Over the doors of many of the rooms along the corridors, little enameled tablets are still preserved. Teacher's room, 3rd grade, 4th grade, grade supervisor. But alongside the old tablets, or covering them, sheets of paper have been tacked up as best as they might, bearing the mysterious hieroglyphics of the revolution. TZK, PSR, SD, Mensheviki, SD, Bolsheviki, Left SR, Anarchist Communist, Dispatching Room of the TZIK, etc., etc. The observant John Reed notices a placard on the walls. Comrades, for the sake of your own health, observe cleanliness. Alas, nobody observes cleanliness, not even nature. October Petrograd is living under a canopy of rain. The streets, long unswept, are dirty. Enormous puddles are standing in the court of Smolny. The mud is carried into the corridors and halls by the soldiers' boots. But nobody is looking down now underfoot. All are looking forward. Very interesting. So what Trotsky is saying here is that the headquarters now of the Soviets, or the Bolsheviks, is in this school. And this is where all the leftists are sort of like, coming together. And, once again, putting out the plot for insurrection. Okay? All right. Nelson says, I don't care for soccer, but I wanted recognition for Cape Verde, and we lost to Argentinians. I mean, Argentina has been famous for football forever. I mean, they're one of the best teams, but I digress. All right. So Nelson says, it depends on the podcast. Critical theory has evolved much since Trotsky. Well, this is not critical theory. This critical theory is the idea that the world around us tries to keep us in a perpetual state of distraction, instead of agitating for revolution. This is revolutionary theory. This is past critical theory. This is past thinking about critical theory. Critical theory is solely about what me and Acti do when we analyze movies. When we look at a movie, we say, okay, why is this movie telling us that essentially the state is good, life is good, the police are good, etc., rather than agitating us to fight against capitalist structures. This is revolutionary. This is revolutionary theory about how to successfully overturn a system. And so, no, these are fundamentals, I would say. And if you're going to start talking about Horkheimer or Adorno or, whatever 20th century, mid or late 20th century theorists that came later, that's a totally different thing. None of those guys actually picked up a gun and shot a nigga. Trotsky shot niggas. So I think his words might mean more than Horkheimer or Adorno's. But if you want to believe critical theory from a podcast rather than reading the book yourself, I digress. Go ahead. That is your prerogative, sir. Your prerogative. Continuing. Smolny is more and more firmly and imperiously giving commands, for the passionate sympathy of the masses is lifting up. However, the central leadership grasps directly only the topmost links of that revolutionary system that as a connected whole is destined to achieve the change. The most important processes are taking place below, and somehow of their own accord. The factories and barracks are the chief forges of history in these days and nights. As in February, the Viborg district focuses the basic forces of the revolution, but it has today a thing it lacked in February, its own powerful organization, open and universally recognized. From the dwellings, the factory lunchrooms, the clubs, the barracks, all threads lead to the house numbered 38 Samsonevsky Prospect, where are located the district committee of the Bolsheviks, the Viborg Soviet, and the military headquarters. The district militia is fusing with the Red Guard. The district is wholly in the control of the workers. If the government should raid Smolny, the Viborg district alone could reestablish a center and guarantee the further offensive. Okay? Nelson says, okay, call it capitalist critique, and successfully is debatable. He got packed and the project didn't last 50 years, and I'm a Marxist leaning myself. This is the thing. We don't worship the Soviet Union here, but it was successful in overturning the capitalist system. Whether it lasted 50 years or 500 years, I would say that the Bolsheviks were successful. Okay? Eventually, America will end. Would you say that George Washington and them weren't successful in creating a white settler colonial state? I mean, if America ends tomorrow, would we say that they weren't successful? How much time does something have to last for it to be considered a success? I guess this is a good question. I guess sending the first man to space, finding cures for diseases, industrializing and making literate one of the largest countries, the largest country in the world, in the span of a generation. I guess that's all unsuccessful. I guess successful is like what America did or Portugal did. Portugal is successful because they enslaved half the world and sent millions of Africans to their death. Okay? All right, Right Side Up Penguin says the Bolsheviks fought a civil war that had an 80% chance of losing. They were definitely successful. Absolutely. You took a ragtag group of people who were peasants, who were workers, who were disaffected soldiers, and made them fight against the Americans, the British, the Germans. Everybody was against the Bolshevik Revolution, and yet, and still, they were successful. If the Soviet Union wasn't successful, and once again, I am not a super apologist for the Soviet Union. I couldn't give a fuck. But if the Soviet Union wasn't successful, then what is Cuba? So Cuba's not successful. Vietnam's not successful. Laos is not successful. Okay? All right. Nelson is saying America is committing genocide without consequences, so they're far more successful than the Soviets, who failed to defeat an obvious evil. So if the villain wins, then that means the good guys are, I guess, totally unsuccessful. If that's your way of thinking about it, okay. I would say, as a Marxist, as a communist, success is overthrowing the capitalist ruling class and giving the means of production to the people. That is my definition of success. To some degree, you could say that the Soviet Union did that. They did not have a capitalist class. The means of production were nationalized, and they were trying their best to move towards a non-class-based society. If you want to debate the success of after that, then I guess. But that's what I would say. That's the same reason I would say Cuba is successful. You get what I'm saying? But I digress. All right. The denouement was approaching close, but the ruling circles thought, or pretended to think, that they had no special cause for anxiety. The British Embassy, which had its own reasons for following events in Petrograd with some attention, received, according to the Russian ambassador in London, reliable information about the coming insurrection. To the anxious inquiries of Buchanan at the inevitable diplomatic luncheon, Tereshchenko replied with warm assurance, "Nothing of the kind is possible. The government has the reins firmly in hand." The Russian embassy in London found out about the revolution in Petrograd from the dispatches of a British telegraph agency. The mine owner, Auerbach, paying a visit during those days to the deputy minister Palchinsky, inquired in passing, after a conversation about more serious matters, as to the dark clouds on the political horizon. He received a most reassuring answer. The next storm in a series, and nothing more. It will pass over, and all will clear. Sleep well. Palchinsky himself was going to pass 1 or 2 sleepless nights before he got arrested. The more unceremoniously Kerensky treated the compromised leaders, the less did he doubt that in the hour of danger they would come punctually to his aid. The weaker the compromisers grew, the more carefully did they surround themselves with an atmosphere of illusion, exchanging words of neutral encouragement between their Petrograd turrets and their upper crust organizations in the province and the front. The Mensheviks and social revolutionaries created a simulacrum of public opinion, and thus disguising their own impotence, fooled not so much their enemy as themselves. All right? Nelson Moreno says, success means achieving your long-term ideological goals. Well, I laid out what my ideological goals were, what my criteria of success is. So, what is is there any successful socialist state? Nelson then says, they envisioned an eventual communist society without classes or even a state. The USSR never achieved that. Instead, it remained a centralized state with a powerful bureaucracy until it dissolved. If you want to look at it that way, I would say that they were trying to build socialism until right-wing reactionary forces within the party eventually became successful. As we know, the Soviet Union was not overthrown in a mass movement. It wasn't a bunch of people who came to essentially, topple the government. Was there some dissatisfaction towards the end of the Soviet Union? Yes, but it was essentially a coup of right-wing forces within the party who essentially said, we want to, dissolve this thing and give power to ourselves and our buddies and sell off the resources of the nation. If the eventual goal is a communist society, yes, that is what all Marxists want, but we know that it takes time to develop socialism, and that includes developing more of the economic resources to make it possible to be able to give everybody what they need and what they desire. Okay, so that is a long-term goal, and it can be argued that the Soviet Union was not successful because of its own faults, but rather because of the arms race that they were goaded into by the West. America kept on putting on more nukes and putting lasers in the sky pointed at the Soviet Union, so the Soviets felt like they had to keep up too. Not only that, the Soviet Union was sending billions of dollars worth of arms and help and aid to countries that were fighting against decolonialization and imperialism. Half of Africa would probably still be colonized if it weren't for the help of the Soviet Union. You know what I'm saying? Once again, I'm not a super apologist, but you could make the argument the Soviet Union had to die for Africa to be free. if you want to even think about it like that. Were there problems with the Soviet Union? Yes, there was sexism, there was homophobia, there was racism within it. Their invasion of Afghanistan was wrong. Their draining of the, what is it called, Aral Sea or whatever, was probably very detrimental to the environment. I'm not a super defender of the Soviet Union. They did some evil shit. But as a Marxist, my ultimate goal in ranking a state or a society that is trying to reach communism is not, did they reach communism eventually? No, that's not because that's so far ahead of the future. The goal is, were you able to get rid of your bourgeois capitalist class and create a state that nationalized the means of production for the people and tried as much as possible to make society more equitable? That's my measure. That's my measure. And of course the end goal is communism. But, the end goal of a white supremacist, the end goal for white supremacists is a totally white world where all of us are dead, where all the Jews and the Negroes and everybody else are gone. But do you think that, the white supremacists would say that, their favorite white supremacist leader or state is not successful? I doubt it. I doubt it. They're still standing the Third Reich. They're still standing the Third Reich, even though that is demonstrably unsuccessful. I'm from the South, where they throw up the stars and bars as if they were the winners. And yet, and still, I'm very confused by your measure, Nelson. You get what I'm saying? But I digress. Let's continue here. The cumbersome and good-for-nothing state apparatus, representing a combination of March socialist with czarist bureaucrat, was perfectly accommodated to the task of self-deception. The half-baked March socialist dreaded to appear to the bureaucrat a not wholly mature statesman. The bureaucrat dreaded lest he show a lack of respect to the new ideas. Thus was created a web of official lies, in which generals, district attorneys, newspapermen, commissars, aides-de-camp lied the more, the nearer they stood to the seats of power. The commander of the Petrograd military district made comforting reports, for the reason that Kerensky, faced by an uncomforting reality, had great need of them. The traditions of the dual power worked in the same direction. Were not the current orders of the military headquarters, when countersigned by the Military Revolutionary Committee, implicitly obeyed? The patrolling squads throughout the city were filled out by the troops of the garrison in the usual order. And we must add, it had been long since the troops had gone their patrol duty with such zeal as now. Discontent among the masses, but slaves in revolt are always discontented. Only the scum of the garrison and the workers' districts will take part in mutinous attempts. The soldiers' sections are against headquarters, but the military department of the Central Executive Committee is for Kerensky. The whole organized democracy, with the exception of the Bolsheviks, supports the government. Thus, the rosy March nimbus had turned into a gray vapor, hiding the actual traits of things. It was only after the break between Smolny and headquarters that the government tried to adopt a more serious attitude toward the situation. There is, of course, no immediate danger, they said, but this time we must avail ourselves of the opportunity to put an end to the Bolsheviks. Besides, the bourgeois allies were bringing every pressure to bear on the Winter Palace. On the night of the 24th, the government summoned up its courage and passed a resolution to institute legal proceedings against the Military Revolutionary Committee, to shut down the Bolshevik papers advocating insurrection, to summon reliable military detachment from the environs and from the front. The proposal to arrest the Military Revolutionary Committee as a body, although adopted in principle, was postponed in execution. For so large an undertaking, they decided it was necessary to secure in advance the support of the pre-parliament. The rumor of the government's decision spread immediately through the town. In the building of the main headquarters alongside the Winter Palace, the soldiers of the Pavlovsky Regiment, one of the most reliable units of the Military Revolutionary Committee, were on sentry duty during the night of the 24th. Conversations went on in their presence about summoning the Junkers, about lifting the bridges, about arrest. All that the Pavlovsky managed to hear and remember, they immediately passed on to Smolny. Those in the Revolutionary Center did not always know how to make use of the communications of this self-constituted intelligence service. but it fulfilled an invaluable function. The workers and soldiers of the whole city were made aware of the intentions of the enemy and reinforced in their readiness to resist. Early in the morning, the authorities began their preparations for aggressive action. The military schools of the capital were ordered to make ready for battle. The cruiser Aurora, moored in the Neva, its crew favorable to the Bolsheviks, was ordered to put out and join the rest of the fleet. Military detachments were called in from neighboring points. A battalion of shock troops from Sarko Selo, the Junkers from Oranienbaum, the artillery from Pavlovsk. The headquarters of the Northern Front was asked to send reliable troops to the capital immediately. In the way of direct measures of military precaution, the following orders were given: to increase the guard of the Winter Palace, to raise the bridges over the Neva, to have all automobiles inspected by the Junkers, to cut Smolny out of the telephone system. The Minister of Justice, Maliantovich, gave an order for the immediate arrest of those Bolsheviks released under bail who had again brought themselves to attention by anti-governmental activity. This blow was aimed primarily at Trotsky. The fickleness of the times is well illustrated by the fact that Maliantovich, as also his predecessor Zarudny, had been Trotsky's defense counsel in the trial of the St. Petersburg Soviet of 1905. Then, too, it had been a question of the leadership of the Soviet. The indictments were identical in the two cases, except that the former defenders, when they became accusers, added the little point about German gold. Headquarters developed a particularly feverish activity in the sphere of typography. Document followed document. No coming out will be permitted. The guilty will be held strictly responsible. Detachments of the garrison not to leave their barracks without orders from headquarters. All commissars of the Petrograd Soviet to be removed. Their illegal activities to be investigated, with a view to court-martial. In these formidable orders, it was not indicated who was to carry them out or how. Under threat of personal liability, the commander demanded that owners of automobiles place them at the disposal of headquarters, with a view of preventing unlawful seizures. But nobody moved a finger in response. The Central Executive Committee was also prolific of warnings and forbiddings, and the Peasant Executive Committee, the City Duma, and central committees of the Mensheviks and Social Revolutionaries followed in its steps. All these institutions were sufficiently rich in literary resources. In the proclamations that plastered the walls and fences, the talk was invariably about a handful of lunatics, about the danger of bloody encounters, about the inevitability of counter-revolution. At 5:30 in the morning, a government commissar with a detachment of Junkers showed up at the Bolshevik printing plant, and after manning the exits, presented an order of headquarters for the immediate suppression of the central organ and the soldiers' paper. What? Headquarters? Does that still exist? No orders are recognized here without the sanction of the Military Revolutionary Committee. But that did not help. The stereotypes were smashed, the buildings sealed. The government had scored its first success. Shout out to Acti up in the chat. She says, looking like a hottie commie with the red shirt. I appreciate that, Acti. I appreciate that so much. But I would like to ask you, Acti, the smartest person I know, when you think of the October Revolution in 1917, how does it come to mind? How do you imagine it? How were you taught about it? What have you heard about it, if anything? So I would like to ask this question to everybody. This has been the primary question today. Because I think what Trotsky is saying is that, once again, we imagine a revolution to be this thing where everybody is involved, society becomes anarchic, and life becomes like the picture that we see of the fall of Rome, when the city is burning, people are jumping into the river, and all society has collapsed. When Trotsky has really just said so far that ballets are still happening, kids are still studying in textbooks, rich people are still gambling, and life goes on. While the whole political sphere is going through a radical change. But once again, the question is for the audience. When you think of October 1917, how do you imagine it? We've read so much that explains how it happened and how it was successful and everything that led up to it. And I said in the previous live stream yesterday that, they actually had the revolution, they actually had the insurrection way before the insurrection. But I digress. I would like to know what you all think. All right, continuing here. A worker and a working girl from the Bolshevik printing plant ran panting to Smolny and there found Podolsky and Trotsky. If the committee would give them a guard against the Junkers, the workers would bring out the paper. A form was soon found for the first answer to the government offensive. An order was issued to the Litovsky regiment to send a company immediately to the defense of the workers' press. The messengers from the printing plant insisted that the 6th Battalion of sappers be also ordered out. These were near neighbors and loyal friends. Telephonographs were immediately sent to the two addresses. The Litovsky and the sappers came out without delay. The seals were torn from the building, the molds again poured, and the work went on. With a few hours' delay, the newspapers suppressed by the government came out under protection of the troops of a committee that was itself liable to arrest. That was insurrection. That is how it developed. Once again, a fundamental thing that we have been learning from this book that you won't get from a podcast. You won't get this from a podcast. Even up to the point that the October Revolution was about to happen, they were still printing the newspapers. Propaganda is key to communist activity. I repeat, propaganda is key to communist activity. All we are supposed to do as communists is talk and talk and talk and talk and yap and yap and yap and yap and write and write and write and write and agitate and agitate and agitate and agitate. Okay? Even up to the point where they are already planning to burst up in the Winter Palace, arrest all the remaining senators, and start a new government. It was still very important to put out propaganda. Highly, highly, highly important. But I digress. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the later 20th century Marxists who never picked up a gun and shot a nigga have a better idea. Do y'all have better ideas? How do we successfully have revolution and insurrection? How do we get rid of the bourgeois government? Because I guess Trotsky and them don't know what they're talking about. I guess it was a long time ago. And us humans have so fundamentally changed that, propaganda doesn't work. Does Adorno have the answer? Does Horkheimer have the answer? Do any of your favorite Marxist podcasters have the answer to how to successfully stage a revolution as they sit in their living rooms in air-conditioned houses, talking on computer screens like your boy? Who knows more, me or a nigga that shot a nigga for the revolution? Who? Anyway, Acti says, it feels like something I want to do right now in Turkey. Okay, I hear you, Acti. I hear you. But answer the question. Why is it that my wife can't even answer the question? I asked my wife a question, she won't even answer it. Maybe my whole format of asking questions to the audience is wrong. Once again, I'm not going to sit here and say that, the way I do it is right. I have to find a way to agitate and get people to actually go along with what I'm saying. So I'll just ask the question again, I see, and maybe it'll help. When you think of the October Revolution, how does it come to your mind, Acti? And I guess tell us what is happening right now in Turkey with the Turkish left. The real left, not the CHP. Not CHP. Like what's going on in Turkey with the real left. All right, let's continue here. During this same time, the cruiser Aurora had addressed a question to Smolny. Shall we go to sea or remain in the Neva? The very same sailors who had guarded the Winter Palace against Kornilov in August were now burning to settle accounts with Kerensky. The government order was promptly countermanded by the committee, and the crew received order number 1218. In case of an attack on the Petrograd garrison by the counter-revolutionary forces, the cruiser Aurora is to protect herself with tugs, steamboats, and cutters. The cruiser enthusiastically carried out this order, for which it had only been waiting. Once again, by propagating, agitating, talking, writing, you could have a warship. Think about that, man. Think about that. I say this on almost every single live stream, man. The Bolsheviks had a fucking warship, a fucking cruiser, a cruiser boat, military boat at their disposal from propaganda. All right. Nelson says the lessons of the October Revolution is that emergency measures have a tendency to become permanent. Don't let that be the cause. And the question is, will your own system continue correcting itself once you are in power? Shooting can only do so much. I am so confused by what Nelson is saying. Like, this is when you don't read the text and you come into the test and you're just like writing an essay, and the longer sentences you write, the more you hope the professor will help you pass. Okay? Yeah. What emergency measures were put into place in the October Revolution? Because we didn't read that in the book. That's nowhere in the book about emergency measures. Are you talking about the ones that the bourgeois did when they tried to shut down the Military Revolutionary Committee? When they tried to ban the Bolsheviks newspaper? Because that's where we are in the story. There's nothing here about emergency measures. Okay? I don't know what Nelson is saying. This is when we have ESL speakers up in here, man. Sometimes we have ESL speakers up in here, and they be struggling, man. They be struggling. Anyway, I continue here. So these two acts of resistance, suggested by workers and sailors, and carried out thanks to the sympathy of the garrison, with complete impunity, became political events of capital importance. The last remnants of the fetishism of authority crumbled to dust. It became instantly clear, says one of the participants, that the job was done. If not yet done, it was at least proving much simpler than anyone had imagined yesterday. Going to Akti, she says, I want to do it in Turkey because we need autonomy and freedom in every sense in Turkey, and we need a workers' movement. We need a workers' movement. I like to hear that, Akti. I'm glad to hear that. Once again, I want to ask, what is the economic situation like in Turkey? How about that? I'll ask this question to Akti. What is the economic situation like in Turkey? How are workers being treated? How are the wages? How are the conditions of unions in Turkey? Do we have independent unions? Are they able to go on strike and make demands? All right? Explain that. Talk more, Akti, about that. Let the people know about what's happening in Turkey. And secondly, I will ask the question again to Akti. I can't even see, guys. This shows you like I don't run shit in my house. You know, me and Akti have become such a new age couple that I can't even ask her. Sorry, I can't even get her to respond to my questions. I asked her, how does she think about the October Revolution? Got no answer. Silence. All right. Here's the dummy emergency measures that made sense but later didn't. What emergency measures? Ban on factions within the Communist Party, suppression of opposition parties. Okay, I can't write that fast, Jesus. Okay, says Akti. Okay, so how are these bad things? How are these bad things? I don't see how they are bad things. Opposition parties are bourgeois parties and counter-revolutionary parties. They shouldn't exist. War communism is absolutely dope. War communism is my porn name. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with war communism. Creation of the Cheka, hey man, I'm not a police abolitionist. So if you're trying to say the Cheka was bad, the CIA is bad. Okay, I am not above whataboutism. The Cheka is not bad. Okay, Akti says it's hard to write all of her thoughts. It's okay, dear. It's okay. I'm sorry for picking on you. Listen. The more y'all talk, all right. James Wright says, has Hulkamaniac stopped by today? If he comes by, let's all just greet him with the KKK. If we see Hulkamaniac, just at him with the KKK. Okay? The CIA is very bad, yes. The Cheka might have been bad too. I don't know. I don't care. Because the point is, we should defeat the bourgeoisie. We should defeat the capitalist interest by any means necessary. Okay? But you're talking about stuff outside of the book, Nelson. You're coming into our classroom and not talking about the text. You're talking about whatever you've heard from outside. You get what I'm saying? If you had been involved in the class, you would have more to contribute. But what you're saying here is just like out of pocket. We haven't got there. Have you read the book, Nelson? Have you read the book before? I don't think so. But I digress. Let's continue here. An attempt to suppress the papers, a resolution to prosecute the Military Revolutionary Committee, an order removing commissars, the cutting out of Smolny's telephones. These pinpricks were just sufficient to convict the government of preparing a counter-revolutionary coup d'etat. Although an insurrection can win on the offensive, it develops better the more it looks like self-defense. A piece of political sealing wax on the door of the Bolshevik editorial rooms. As a military measure, that is not much. But what a superb signal for battle. Telephonograms to all districts and units of the garrison announced the event. The enemy of the people took the offensive during the night. The Military Revolutionary Committee is leading the resistance to the assault of the conspirators. The conspirators, these were the institutions of the official government. From the pen of revolutionary conspirators, this term came as a surprise, but it wholly corresponded to the situation and to the feelings of the masses. Crowded out of all its positions, compelled to undertake a belated defense, incapable of mobilizing the necessary forces, or even finding out whether it had such forces, the government had developed a scattered, unthought out, uncoordinated action, which in the eyes of the masses inevitably looked like a malevolent attempt. The committee's telephonograms gave the command: make the regiment ready for battle and await further orders. That was the voice of a sovereign power. The commissars of the committee themselves, liable to removal by the government, continued with redoubled confidence to remove those whom they thought it necessary to remove. All right. Nelson says, not this one, but others about communist history. This one is great. I should read it, but my point still follows because there are encounter to your challenges, not just the books. I hear you, Nelson, and I appreciate you, coming in and, challenging me. That's why I always appreciate your commentary. And to be frank, criticism of the Soviet Union is not something that I get super sensitive about, okay? I just wonder where these arguments are coming from, as if the counter to them is somehow better, okay? We are, of course, trying to create a better society than what existed in the USSR. And yes, we are more advanced in our Marxist theory and practice than the old Bolsheviks were back then, mainly because we're dealing with issues that they weren't dealing with then. Trotsky has written here about women being involved in the Bolshevik movement, but I think there was probably still a lot of sexism within the Bolshevik movement, and that's just me reading in between the lines. But that's just one thing that's very different from our movement now than it was back then. And also, I think many, modern Marxists today are against capital punishment. Many modern Marxists are now more environmentalist than the old Marxists of the past, and of course accepting of LGBTQ people than the Marxists of the past. So yeah, of course there's been a development in Marxist theory and praxis. I'm just, the stuff that you're saying here, when we just analyze it in where we are in the story, we're talking about revolutionary theory in the sense that we want to change, radically change, revolutionize our societies as they are now. And I feel like when you're coming with your comments that you're speaking from a place that revolution is not possible or undesirable. I guess I'll just straight up ask you, do you want a revolution in Portugal? Would you be happy about a socialist society coming to existence in Portugal? If there was a vanguard party that led a mass movement to seize the state, smash it, create something new, and declare itself a people's republic, dictated by workers' councils, would you actually be happy about that? Would you be happy about that? Or is there some sort of revisionist sort of view or of reformation and social cohesion that could be put together that does not involve that? Okay, I guess I'll just ask you directly because I feel like you're coming at it sideways. You're coming at me sideways, essentially saying that, revolution is impossible and or undesirable and some better way is there. Okay, I digress. Let's continue here. The Aurora and the Neva meant not only an excellent fighting unit in the service of the insurrection, but a radio station ready for use. Invaluable advantage. The sailor Kirchhoff has remembered. We got word from Trotsky to broadcast that the counter-revolution had taken the offensive. Here, too, the defensive formulation concealed a summons to insurrection addressed to the whole country. The garrisons guarding the approaches to Petrograd were ordered by radio from the Aurora to hold up the counter-revolutionary echelons, and, in case admonitions were inadequate, to employ force. All revolutionary organizations were placed under obligation to sit continually, accumulating all possible information as to the plans and activities of the conspirators. There was no lack of proclamations, however. The word was not divorced from the deed, but was a comment on it. Somewhat belatedly, the Military Revolutionary Committee undertook a more serious fortification of Smolny. In leaving the building at 3 o'clock on the night of the 24th, John Reed noticed machine guns at the entrances and strong patrols guarding the gates and the adjacent street corners. The patrols had been reinforced the day before by a company of the Litovsky Regiment and a company of machine gunners with 24 machine guns. During the day, the guard increased continually. In the Smolny region, writes Shliapnikov, I saw a familiar picture, reminding me of the first days of the February Revolution around the Tauride Palace. The same multitude of soldiers, workers, and weapons of all kinds, innumerable cords of firewood, had been piled up in the court, a perfect cover against rifle fire. Motor trucks were bringing up foodstuffs and munitions. All Smolny, says Raskolnikov, was converted into an armed camp. Cannon were in position out in front of the columns, machine guns alongside them, almost in every step, those same Maxims, looking like toy cannons. And through all the corridors, the swift, loud, happy tramp of workers, soldiers, sailors, and agitators. Sukhanov accusing the organizers of the insurrection, not without foundation, of insufficient military precaution, writes, only now, in the afternoon and evening of the 24th, did they begin to bring up armed detachments of Red Guards and soldiers to Smolny to defend the headquarters of the insurrection. By the evening of the 24th, the defense of Smolny began to look like something. This matter is not without importance. In Smolny, whence the compromisist executive committee had managed to steal away the two headquarters of the government staff, there were now concentrated the heads of all the revolutionary organizations led by the Bolsheviks. Here assembled on that day the all-important meeting of the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks to take the final decision before striking the blow. 11 members were present. Lenin had not yet turned up from his refuge in the Vyborg district. Zinoviev also was absent from the session. According to the temperamental expression of Zhezherinsky, he was hiding and taking no part in party work. Kamenev, on the other hand, although sharing the views of Zinoviev, was very active in the headquarters of the insurrection. Stalin was not present at the session. Generally speaking, he did not appear at Smolny, spending his time in the editorial office of the central organ. The session, as always, was held under the chairmanship of Sverdlov. The official minutes of the session are scant, but they indicate everything essential for characterizing the leading participants in the revolution and the distribution of functions among them. They are irreplaceable. All right. So let's go here to the comments. Nelson says, just to answer your question of why banning opposition parties was bad on the long term, rival socialist parties were banned or marginalized. Political pluralism largely disappeared. Without political pluralism, example, if grain requisitioning is causing famine, who can publicly argue against it without being accused of opposing the revolution? Okay, but that could be done within one party. Okay, there could be various views within a party. As we saw within the Soviet Union, they didn't have multiple parties, and still the right wing won. Okay, so we don't need a multitude of parties. If you had been following the book, Nelson, you would know that there were essentially three big socialist parties popping up at this time. We had the Social Revolutionaries, the Mensheviks, and the Bolsheviks. And all, except the Bolsheviks, according to Trotsky, were essentially amenable to bourgeois power. The Social Revolutionaries and the Mensheviks were okay with selling out the revolution and telling the workers, wait, we are going to fix things, just wait until the war is over, until we find a way to, keep the bourgeoisie in power, etc., etc. So, the thing is that A true vanguard party will be at the tip of the spear when it comes to speaking for the most radical demands of the workers. And anything that is less than the most radical demands of the workers is going to be reactionary and does not really need to exist. And plus, if true socialist parties are coming to power or are coming together, the idea is that they should meld into one. Liberal bourgeois bullshit has us thinking that we should be in a permanent battle of Republican versus Democrat, of left versus right. Eventually, there has to be a winner. One dragon has to die. Okay? So we're not gonna continue this bourgeois bullshit thinking that somehow we are less democratic because we don't let our enemies exist on the opposite side of the Congress Hall when they say, why can't we fuck your children? Why can't we eat your kids? Okay? That's essentially what exists now. That's essentially what exists. You have the Democrats and the Republicans. One wants to eat the children, one wants to fuck the children. Okay? We don't want either of those parties existing in our Congress Hall. So yeah, like, get them out of here. I'm not going to deal with this bullshit. This bourgeois democratic bullshit. Okay? So James Wright says Trump just gave an interview saying communism was a mortal threat to the U.S. They know that revolution is coming. This train has no brakes. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. You know, I never thought in my lifetime that I would see communism and socialism being spoken about so openly in, you know, the mainstream liberal media. You know, I think it's because the contradictions, once again, of our society are reaching very, very, you know, high levels. Especially after the 2008 financial crash and then COVID and, you know, the continuing depreciation of living conditions in the U.S. So, yeah, socialism is right around the corner. I believe revolution is right around the corner. Revolution is around the corner, but this is something Nelson doesn't know. Nelson doesn't know this, the difference between revolution and insurrection. I'm sure James Wright knows because James Wright is our brightest student. James Wright is one of our smartest students in the class who has been paying attention to our lessons, who has probably been doing the quizzes as well. So there's a fundamental difference between revolution and insurrection. Revolution is like sex, insurrection is like giving birth. That's the hint for anybody out there. Revolution is around the corner. But the question will be, will there be a vanguard party to lead the insurrection? That is the question. Okay. Valiant Thor says after World War II, Britain bet its future on democratic socialism, and over the next 3 decades, prices exploded, productivity collapsed, unemployment surged, and one of the world's greatest economies slowly ground to a halt. No, Valiant Thor, what happened is that you let that fat, white, nasty, pasty, white devil bitch, Margaret Thatcher, run your country into the ground. She destroyed the unions. She destroyed any sort of working class labor organizing power. That bitch, Margaret Thatcher, destroyed the UK. It was not democratic socialism. I have a bunch of commissars in here. I think Valiant Thor needs to go to the re-education camp. He needs to go to the re-education camp. Valiant Thor needs to go to the re-education camp. Because how are you going to talk about the United Kingdom and not talk about how Margaret Thatcher broke up the mining strikes? The miners were going on strike and Margaret Thatcher broke their backs in and told them that they will have no bargaining power. You have nothing to say about that. What a bitch. What a hoe. This is the thing. When people start caping for capitalists and caping for capitalism, I can't help but think they sit in the cuck chair in the hotel while a nigga like me go to town on their wife. Okay? All right. Nelson says that there's only one party and leaders discourage organized disagreements in the name of unity. People gradually stop speaking honestly and start telling leaders what they want to hear. I totally disagree because that's not what happened. Nelson, how did the Soviet Union fall apart? How did the Soviet Union fall apart? Was there not a right-wing reactionary tendency in the Socialist Party of the Soviet Union, whatever it was called? And did they not actually just eventually just, collapse because of that? With multiple parties, if one party refuses to listen, another party can publicly criticize it and offer a different approach. That creates more opportunities for mistakes to be exposed. That doesn't then make your enemy at all. Okay, that's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I refuse to live in a permanent samsara wheel of bourgeois bullshit. I refuse to live in a permanent wheel of death of one party back and forth politics. No, no, no. Where's that Kendrick Lamar meme? No, no, no. That's bullshit. I already gave my answer why, allowing multiple parties to exist in a worker state is ridiculous. So I'm not even going to deal with that. I'm not going to deal with that. Oh, shit. I reversed. I don't know how I did this. Rotate counterclockwise. Okay. All right. Sorry. All right. Let's go here. All right. We're here. All right. All right. Let's go here. So, the matter is not without importance. In Smolny, whence the compromiseless executive committee had managed to steal away to the headquarters of the government staff, there were now concentrated the heads of all revolutionary organizations led by the Bolsheviks. Here assembled on that day the all-important meeting of the Central Committee of the Bolsheviks to take the final decision before striking the blow. 11 members were present. Lenin had not yet turned up from his refuge in the Vyborg district. Zinoviev also was absent from this session. According to the temperamental expression of Zhezherinsky, he was hiding and taking no part in party work. Kamenev, on the other hand, although sharing the views of Zinoviev, was very active in the headquarters of the insurrection. Stalin was not present at the session. Generally speaking, he did not appear at Smolny, spending his time in the editorial office of the central organ. The session, as always, was held under the chairmanship of Sverdlov. The official minutes of the session are scant, but they indicate everything essentially. For characterizing the leading participations in the revolution and the distribution of functioning among them, they are irreplaceable. It was a question of taking full possession of Petrograd in the next 24 hours. That meant to seize those political and technical institutions that were still in the hands of the government. The Congress of Soviets must hold its session under the Soviet power. The practical measures of the nocturnal assault had been worked out, or were being worked out, by the Military Revolutionary Committee and the military organizations of the Bolsheviks. The Central Committee was to underline the final points. First of all, a proposal of Kamenev's was adopted. Today, no member of the Central Committee can leave Smolny without a special resolution. It was decided over and above that to keep on duty here members of the Petrograd Committee of the party. The minutes read further. Trotsky proposes that they place at the disposal of the Military Revolutionary Committee 2 members of the Central Committee for the purpose of establishing communications with the postal and telegraph workers and the railroad workers, a 3rd member to keep the Provisional Government under observation. It was resolved to delegate Zhezherinsky to the postal and telegraph workers, Bubnov to the railroad workers. At first, and obviously at Sverdlov's suggestion, it was proposed to allot the watch over the Provisional Government to Podolsky. The minutes read, objections to Podolsky. Sverdlov is appointed. Milutin, who passed as an economist, was appointed to organize the supply of food for the period of the insurrection. Negotiations with the left social revolutionaries were entrusted to Kamenev, who had the reputation of a skillful, although too yielding parliamentary. Yielding, of course, only from a Bolshevik criterion. Trotsky proposes, we read further, that a reserve headquarters be established in the Peter and Paul fortress, and that 1 member of the Central Committee be sent there for that purpose. It was resolved to appoint Lasevich and Blagonravov for general observation, to commission Sverdlov to keep in continual touch with the fortress. Further, to supply all members of the Central Committee with passes to the fortress. Shout out to OG Kicks. He got 100 guns and 100 clips. All right. Along party lines, all threads were held in the hands of Sverdlov, who knew the cadres of the party as no one else did. He kept Smolny in touch with the Bolshevik party apparatus, supplied the Military Revolutionary Committee with the necessary workers, and was summoned into the Committee for Counsel at all critical moments. Since the committee had a too broad and to some extent fluid membership, the more conspirative undertakings were carried out through the heads of the military organization of the Bolsheviks, or through Sverdlov, who was the unofficial but all the more real General Secretary of the October insurrection. The Bolshevik delegates arriving in those days for the Congress of Soviets would come first into the hands of Sverdlov and would not be left for one unnecessary hour without something to do. On the 24th, there were already 200 or 300 provincial delegates in Petrograd, and the majority of them were included one way or another in the mechanics of the insurrection. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, they assembled at a caucus in Smolny to hear a report from the Central Committee of the party. There were waverers among them who, like Zinoviev and Kamenev, preferred a waiting policy. There were also newcomers who were merely not sufficiently reliable. There could be no talk of expounding before this caucus the whole plan of the insurrection. Whatever is said at a large meeting inevitably gets abroad. It was still impossible even to throw off the defensive envelope of the attack without creating confusion in the minds of certain units of the garrison. But it was necessary to make the delegates understand that a decisive struggle had already begun, and that it would remain only for the Congress to crown it. Referring to recent articles of Lenin's, Trotsky demonstrated that a conspiracy does not contradict the principles of Marxism if objective relations make an insurrection possible and inevitable. The physical barrier on the road to power must be overcome by a blow. However, up till now, the policy of the Military Revolutionary Committee has not gone beyond the policy of self-defense. Of course, this self-defense must be understood in a sufficiently broad sense. To assure the publication of the Bolshevik press with the help of armed forces, or to retain the Aurora in the waters of the Neva. Comrades, is that not self-defense? It is defense. If the government intends to arrest us, we have machine guns on the roof of Smolny in preparation for such an event. That also, comrades, is a measure of defense. But how about the Provisional Government, says one of the written questions. What if Kerensky tries not to submit to the Congress of Soviets? The spokesman replied, if Kerensky should attempt not to submit to the Congress of Soviets, then the resistance of the government would have created not a political, but a police question. That was, in essence, almost exactly what happened. Nelson Moreno says, you say that through criticism inside the one party, workers' councils, and so forth, they could have self-corrected. Okay, but, and of course, there has to be a but. There has to be a but with Nelson. It's like a strip club with this man. Did those mechanics continue functioning effectively over time, or did they become increasingly constrained? I don't know. Once again, I am not a super duper expert on the Soviet Union and all its successes and failures. I am not a, Soviet historian. That is not my goal. That is not my goal in reading the history of the Russian Revolution. Okay? The goal of reading the Russian Revolution is to gain context on pre-revolutionary times in Russia so that we can have a better context to understand our times we are living in now. Since I started reading this book a month ago, I did not say I was reading this to gain a history or more context or how to better glaze the Soviet Union. This is not the point. Not the point at all, okay? The point of reading this is to gain revolutionary theory from a nigga that did praxis, okay? That was the point of reading this book. Secondly, when it comes to an organization becoming constrained in a hypothetical one-party state that we want to create as workers, as socialists, I believe that the Workers' Council should be independent from the state. So, of course, the party can exist as a political organ to help, dictate society and make sure that the proletariat remains in power and the bourgeois cannot come back into power. But the workers' councils should continue to agitate for the most radical demands of workers in a socialist state. This is why you never hear me bring up China. I never bring up China in my examples of socialist states because in China there are no independent unions. You cannot go on strike. Have you ever heard me come over here and praise China? Yes, I read Huey P. Newton's book, and Huey P. said he went to China and he believes they're trying to build socialism. And in general, I'm more favorable of China than it is America, okay? Because there's less blood on the hands of the Chinese. But a fundamental sin I believe, of the Chinese Communist Party is that they essentially blocked workers' power. You know what I'm saying? If it's widely known as a joke that there's no labor rights in China, that most likely a little Chinese boy was in a sweatshop making my shirt, then that looks very bad. That looks the worst on, socialism. And, China has something to answer for that. But I would say, if I were to be a part of a committee to help draw up our new socialist society after we done blown up the Pentagon and blown up the White House, when we seize the state and smash it, I would say one party state. We need only one party. And within our party, all your tendencies can be expressed. But there will be no counter-revolutionary party, period. But the workers' councils and the right for workers to strike, to demand higher wages, and to continue to advocate for their best interests should remain independent. And, workers' councils would be a way to rein in on the power of the, one-party state, if that answers your question, okay? All right. So, and Kirkham Down Stalin just came in and said something that we said over 30 minutes ago, and I think should be obvious. He says one-party system can still have internal debates too. Absolutely. All right. Nelson says, my stripper name is Destiny. No. Your stripper name is Reformism. Your stripper name is Miss Revisionist. Your stripper name, Destiny, is Miss Revisionist. M-I-Z-Z Revisionist. Okay? Coming to the stage, Miss Revisionist. She gonna make you rethink your whole worldview. Throw some dollars for that bad bougie bitch. Okay? Miss Revisionist. That is your name. Okay? All right, Nelson says, okay, how do you ensure those councils remain independent over decades, especially if a powerful party or state apparatus develops alongside them? Write it into the Constitution. Write it into the new Constitution of the state. That the workers have to, the same way in America, they have now basically guaranteed, as long as that evil state exists, that people will have a right to an AR-15. You can make people believe. I think people forget that nations or states sort of create a culture, and whatever is permissible in that culture is very hard to change. And so in America, we have this culture of worshiping the gun. Doesn't matter how many kids get gunned down in that bitch, you will never convince most Americans that they should not have a right to have a gun. Even some leftists. I've been yelling on my channel for years that we as leftists need to stand against the Second Amendment. Crickets. Them niggas still ain't on my side. And I don't blame him, because Kirkham Down Stalin is a great shooter. That nigga gonna knock all you bitches off. For real. So, listen. There's some things that will become culturally sacrosanct in the workers' state. Such as the idea that workers are principal. Okay? This is what I think a lot of socialist states have somewhat abandoned. Because they have been under constant attack from America. So a lot of them have remained on a war footing, rather than trying to, develop socialism. You get what I'm saying? Okay. Let's go here. All right. And Nelson says, I love revolutions and we need them. But my problem with revolution is that it's basically aesthetics and identity play now. Nelson has not been reading the book. This is the problem with leftists today. They don't actually read shit. They just listen to, podcasters, as has been admitted by Nelson, and now they think it's all aesthetics. When really, it's especially for us black leftists, nothing would make us happier than seeing the ending of this society. But if all you're listening to is white, quote-unquote Marxists talk on podcasts, all you're going to think it is bullshit and inward fighting and drama. When if you're coming from the nigger side of things, if you're coming from across the tracks like niggas like me who are reading theory, you're not just going to be thinking this is the aesthetics. This is fucking real. This is some real shit. When I read this shit and when I'm giving my theory, it's not me doing a play. That's why you don't see me up here with hammer and sickle paraphernalia. Nigga, I'm talking about ending this fucking world. You know what I'm saying? This is the Afro-pessimist in me coming out. The only way we can get rid of white supremacy, which, to be frank, is my biggest fucking concern as a black man in this world, is to first attack capitalism. So nothing would make me happier than seeing the fall, destruction of America. Nothing would make me happier than seeing the fall, the destruction of capitalism. Stock market just blew up. You get what I'm saying? NY Stock Exchange just blew up. Nothing will make me happier than that. Because we coming from the nigga side of things. But Nelson is over here listening to white podcasters and thinking that this shit is just all about LARPing. It's not, nigga, for real. Okay? Okay, this is insane. This is insane. All right, Nelson is really trying to trigger. He trying to get a clip. I know my guy is just trying to get a clip. He's just trying to get a clip. I get it. Okay? But come on, my guy. You never answer my question is if do you actually want things to change in Portugal, or are you happy with the status quo? I will not read another question from Nelson unless he answers me this. As a nigga in Portugal, do you want to see an insurrection, a working class insurrection in Portugal? Or do you just want things to gradually get better or generally stay the same? Answer that and then we'll actually talk. Because you never answer that question. Okay? All right. And Kirkham Down Solid says there's plenty of revolutionary theory that goes into post-revolution. There's a lot of things that have to be flexible. Okay, pause, no diddy. I don't know what Kirkham Down is talking about with the flexible part. But, yeah. This is the thing. That's my thing. Okay. Anyway. Referring to recent articles of Lenin's, Trotsky demonstrated that a conspiracy does not contradict the principles of Marxism if objective relations make an insurrection possible and inevitable. The physical barrier on the road to power must be overcome by a blow. However, up till now, the policy of the Military Revolutionary Committee has not gone beyond the policy of self-defense. Of course, this self-defense must be understood in a sufficiently broad sense to assure the publication of the Bolshevik press with the help of armed forces, or to retain the Aurora in the waters of the Neva. Comrades, is that not self-defense? It is defense. If the government intends to arrest us, we have machine guns on the roof of Smolny in preparation for such an event. That also, comrades, is a measure of defense. But how about the Provisional Government, says one of the written questions. What if Kerensky tries not to submit to the Congress of Soviets? The spokesman replied, if Kerensky should attempt not to submit to the Congress of Soviets, then the resistance of the government would have created not a political but a police question. That was in essence almost exactly what happened. At that moment, Trotsky was called out to consult with the deputation just arrived from the City Duma. In the capital, to be sure, it was still quiet, but alarming rumors were afoot. The mayor put these questions. Does the Soviet intend to make an insurrection? And how about keeping order in the city? And what will become of the Duma itself if it does not recognize the revolution? Though these respected gentlemen wanted to know too much, the answer was the question of power is to be decided by the Congress of Soviets. Whether this will lead to an armed struggle depends not so much upon the Soviets as those who, in conflict with the unanimous will of the people, are retaining the state power in their hands. If the Congress declines the power, the Petrograd Soviet will submit. But the government itself is obviously seeking a conflict. Orders have been issued for the arrest of the Military Revolutionary Committee. The workers and soldiers can only reply with ruthless resistance. What about looting and violence from criminal gangs? An order of the committee issued today reads, at the first attempt of criminal elements to bring about disturbances, looting, knifing, or shooting on the streets of Petrograd, the criminals will be wiped off the face of the earth. As to the City Duma, it will be possible in case of a conflict to employ constitutional methods, dissolution and a new election. The delegation went away dissatisfied. But what had they, as a matter of fact, expected? All right. Kirkham Down Stalin is laughing about what? I don't know. Oh, about no Diddy? Okay. Nelson says, of course I want revolution in Portugal. I already said that. I'm interested in the much harder part, how we change things after revolution. Said we are under one party. Don't we need friction? Don't the strippers need to discuss and debate? Miss Revisionist. Okay, all right. I know we like to, let's think about, this part at least. Let's think about this part at least. We are barely at the part where we think about, post-revolution. You know what I'm saying? This is like thinking about, dog, what am I going to do after I fuck Beyonce? When you just, got your first job at Taco Bell. You over here thinking about, what am I going to do after I fuck Beyonce? And you haven't even got your first piece of coochie yet. Okay? So, yeah, of course, what to do, what is to be done after a revolution is vitally important. But we have to remember, if we read our theory, or at least our own history, and not listen to podcasts from white boys that talk like this. If we actually read some fucking history and theory and learned from revolutionary praxis from black folks who tried to build socialism, we wouldn't be confused. We wouldn't be actually confused. Okay? If all you can think about is how you want to stop sectarianism or political repression after a revolution, and not how you actually get to revolution, that to me is counter-revolutionary. If all you're thinking about is the idea that, if we actually get in power, we're about to be repressive against ourselves, I doubt that you're even a leftist to begin with. Because if the idea is that you don't even trust yourself or people like you in power, why the fuck are you on this side? Go over there. Go over there. Because we don't think that's not the goal. The end goal is not to get in power and start repressing everybody that, doesn't agree with our view of creating a better society. But if you think that's what we want to do, then why are you on this side? You get what I'm saying? I digress. Kirkham Stalin says, it's all determined dialectically. Ain't that the truth? On Contradiction by Mao is something that we should read. Nothing and nobody is set in stone. It's all determined via analysis and can change. Shout out to Kirkham Stalin. He is this nigga is a silent but deadly just thinker up in the chat. This nigga dropped 2 or 3 lines that basically murk everything that I say by summing it up so nicely. Because my guy Kirkham, he be telling the truth, man. I'm waiting for the moment we disagree and we actually have our dialectic debate. I can't wait for that moment because I'm probably going to get murked with three bars. Okay, anyway. All right. Nelson says, I understand this book is fundamental and I should relate with preconceptions and I should relapse with preconceptions, but Trotsky was outmaneuvered because he was only doing speeches. He got done in Mexico. What happened to the eternal revolution? Nelson, don't do that. Don't do that. All you're saying is that Trotsky is irrelevant because all he did was give speeches. The nigga shot niggas. Trotsky led the Red Army. You know what I mean? He almost single-handedly guaranteed that the Soviets, were successful in the Civil War. What the fuck? He only gave speeches? The nigga picked up the tool and fired on niggas. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? If there's anybody that lived a trill-ass life, it's Trotsky. There's 2 non-niggas that lived a trill-ass life. Trotsky and Shea. Trotsky and Shea lived trill-ass lives. I don't know what you're talking about. Duke Crystal Alafumi says Trotsky was moving crazy. He was. I mean, if you mean crazy, like in both ways. If you're saying his life was crazy, the way he was moving was crazy. Either way, he was living that life. You know what I mean? Highly intellectual. Actually busted his thing. You know what I mean? I don't know what you're talking about. All right, he was doing. All right, I mean, after the victory, he wasn't doing alliances. He was doing multi-hour speeches. Yeah, because he just killed all of his enemies. What you gonna do? What? After you just... Nelson, think about what you would do. What would you do if you just defeated America, France, Germany, and their counter-revolutionary forces in the largest country in the world with a ragtag group of peasants and workers? Wouldn't you not shut up about it? That's what the nigga did. Okay, so he was trying to manifest. Man, I guess I don't know. I don't know where all this slander. This is just right wing. Nelson, at this point, this is just right wing slander. You might as well just say at this point that Che Guevara picked up babies and slammed them on the wall, or summarily executed his enemies. And Che Guevara was this raging anti-black racist. You might as well just go there, Nelson, because that's like the shit you're saying now is to the point. It's getting ridiculous. Yeah, James Wright says, I think we're going around in circles a little bit. The focus of our comrades' attention at the moment is on lessons that can be gained from the revolution. The minutiae of government will come later. Thank you, James Wright. Thank you. I'm sorry to James Wright and all the other people who came into the class today to just learn and hear the history and hear me break it down. I just want to have conversations with you all as well. And I do believe there's some importance to be gleaned from Nelson's contributions. But yeah, let's not just go in circles and talk about post-revolution. What we're talking about is actually getting to the point we can even have those discussions. You know what I mean? We're working at a deficit right now as leftists, and there's a lot that we have to do to even get to the point to worry about, what happens the day after. Okay? Nelson says, I'm not saying anything that Lenin wouldn't say. Okay. I don't know, man. I don't know where you're getting this. Anyway, continuing here. The officials' visit of the city fathers to the camp of the rebels was only too candid a demonstration of the impotence of the ruling groups. Remember, comrades, said Trotsky upon returning to the Bolshevik caucus, that a few weeks ago, when we won the majority, we were only a trade name, without a printing press, without a treasury, without departments. And now the City Duma sends a deputation to the arrested Military Revolutionary Committee for information as to the destiny of the city and the state. The Peter and Paul Fortress, won over politically only yesterday, is today completely taken possession of by the Military Revolutionary Committee. The machine gun crew, the most revolutionary unit, is being brought into fighting trim. A mighty work of cleaning the Colt machine guns is in progress. There are 80 of them. Machine guns are set up on the fortress wall to command the quay and the Trotsky Bridge. The sentry guard at the gates is reinforced. Patrols are sent out into the surrounding districts. But in the heat of these morning hours, it suddenly becomes known that within the fortress itself, the situation is not assured. The uncertainty lies in a bicycle battalion. The bicycle battalions. Recruited like the cavalry from well-to-do and rich peasants, the bicycle men, coming from the immediate city layers, constituted a most conservative part of the army. A theme for idealistic psychologists. Let a man find himself, in distinction from others, on top of two wheels with a chain, at least in a poor country like Russia, and his vanity begins to swell out like his tires. In America, it takes an automobile to produce this effect. That's kind of funny. That's hella funny. So what Trotsky is saying here is that the bicycle battalion was attracting the bourgeois elements. Because in America, if you had a fly Cadillac or something like that, or that brand new Model T that just hit the streets, I'm driving that 1918, baby. This ain't even come out yet. You know what I'm saying? I go 18 miles an hour in this. He's saying that Russia, how the bourgeois distinguish themselves is by riding bicycles, which is just funny. It's funny. And the bourgeois elements in the Military Revolutionary Committee, they had the bicycle battalion, and that's where you could find the more conservative elements on the bikes. Kind of funny. Anyway, brought in from the front to put down the July movement. The bicycle battalion brought in from the front to put down the July movement. The bicycle battalion had zealously stormed the palace of Kasheniskaya and afterward been installed in Peter and Paul as one of the most reliable detachments. It was learned that at yesterday's meeting, which settled the fate of the fortress, the bicycle men had not been present. The old discipline still held in the battalion to such an extent that the officers had succeeded in keeping the soldiers from going into the fortress court. Counting on these bicycle men, the commandant of the fortress held his chin high, frequently got into telephone connection with Kerensky's headquarters, and even professed to be about to arrest the Bolshevik commissar. The situation must not be left indefinite for an extra minute. Upon an order from Smolny, Blogonranov confronts the enemy. The colonel is subjected to house arrest. The telephones are removed from all officers' apartments. The government staff calls up excitedly to know why the commandant is silent, and in general, what is going on in the fortress. Blogonranov respectfully reports over to the telephone that the fortress henceforth fulfills only the orders of the Military Revolutionary Committee, with which it behooves the government in the future to get in connection. Very interesting. So the bicycle boys, they're actually counter-revolutionary forces called in by the government. Because at this point, the government can only call a few guys on bicycles to fight against the Bolsheviks. Very interesting and funny. You know, if I were more creative and if I were smarter and I was only obsessed with money, I would use this book to write the script for a Hamilton-like play. I'd make a play like Hamilton, recounting the events of the Soviet revolution in 1917, these months from February to October, and have, you know, Trotsky rapping in Biggie Smalls' voice, you know, Lenin as a black gay trans woman. I'd have Saucy Santana play Lenin, you know what I mean? I'd have Kerensky played by Drake, you know what I'm saying? I would just have all these characters come alive. And the Bicycle Boys would just be recurring characters, along with the anarchist as well. You know, the Bicycle Boys pop up, they're drinking lattes, you know, from Starbucks cups, and they have really skinny bike jeans on, and they're just the most counter-revolutionary, but they look like hipsters. And meanwhile, the anarchists pull up, and they're just like, you know, just wild men out of nowhere who just throw a Molotov cocktail in a scene or two. It would be pretty hilarious if I was able to write the Hamiltonization of Trotsky's history of the Russian Revolution. It would be pretty hilarious. But what do you think? Would you like to see that? Shout out to Kamal. He says, happy Juneteenth, as we are in July 4th. I get the reference. But yeah, shout out to Kamal up in the live stream for that happy Juneteenth. Okay. All right. Nelson says, yes, I said that I should relax with preconceptions and be more open to the text. Yes. Amen, Nelson. I always appreciate you coming through. You're my day one. You know what I mean? Day one, A1. We got love for you, Nelson, man. But, you know, keep in mind, this is black Marxism on this side here. You know what I'm saying? This is not LARPing. This is not playing. This is not purely for aesthetics. I don't do, you know, rage bait, you know, internet drama, slop, leftist slop, reactionary leftist slop that you see on other channels. I don't do that type of stuff. You know, what we do here is try to educate and be in proper conversation. You know what I mean? Revolutionary conversation and education. James Wright says that genuinely could be $1 billion idea. Yeah, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. So you could have that, James Wright. That ain't even what I'm mad at. If you want to do it, you know what I'm saying? Go ahead and do it. That's my gift to you. If you want to make some money, just write the Hamilton version of the Russian Revolution as a play. You know what I'm saying? And that's $1 billion right there. That's $1 billion. Yep. Anyway, so brought in from the front to put down the July movement, the Bicycle Battalion had zealously stormed the palace of Kashenskaya. Okay, we read that part. All the troops of the fortress garrison accepted the arrest of the commandant with complete satisfaction, but the bicycle men bore themselves evasively. What lay concealed behind their sulky silence? A hidden hostility, or the last waverings. We decided to hold a special meeting for the bicycle men, writes Blagonrov, and invite our best agitational forces, and above all Trotsky, who had enormous authority and influence over the soldier masses. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the whole battalion met in the neighboring building in the Cirque Moderne. As governmental opponents, Quartermaster General Paradelov, considered to be a social revolutionary, took the floor. His objections were so cautious as to seem equivocal, and so much the more destructive was the attack of the committee's representatives. The supplementary oratorical battle for the Peter and Paul Fortress ended as might have been foreseen by all voices except 30. The battalion supported the resolution of Trotsky. One more of the potential bloody conflicts was settled before the fighting and without bloodshed. That was the October insurrection. Such was its style. All right. Shout out to Kamal. He says, happy 4th behind the principle. Yeah, man, we celebrate 250 years of working class people fighting against this imperialistic decadent society. Okay? Yeah, that's what we celebrate. Okay? So, it was now possible to rely upon the fortress with tranquil confidence. Weapons were given out from the arsenal without hindrance. At Smolny, in the factory and shop committee room, delegates from the plants stood in line to get orders for rifles. The capital had seen many queues during the war years. Now it saw rifle queues for the first time. Trucks from all the districts of the city were driving up to the arsenal. You would hardly have recognized the Peter and Paul fortress, writes the worker Skorinko. Its renowned silence was broken by the chugging automobiles, shouts, and the creak of wagons. That was a special bustle in the storehouses. Here, too, they led by us the first prisoners, officers, and junkers. The meeting in the Cirque Moderne had another result. The bicycle men who had been guarding the Winter Palace since July withdrew, announcing that they would no longer consent to protect the government. That was a heavy blow as they wheeled away. The bicycle men had to be replaced by junkers. The military support of the government was more and more reducing itself to the officers' schools, a thing that not only narrowed it extremely, but also conclusively revealed its social constitution. So, essentially, what Trotsky has been describing here over time is the slow weakening of the institutions that protected the bourgeois government to essentially more and more elements that maintain this brick building that was the old government of Russia began to slowly break off, right? And they say, you know, even the bicycle men are riding away saying we can't defend this government. All right. Nelson says, I didn't say that you personally are doing identity play or aesthetics. You are literally doing live reading of Trotsky in YouTube Live. I love you, baby. I don't think lowly of you, or else I wouldn't be here. Shout out to Nelson, man. Shout out to Nelson, man. Listen, man. If, you know, that's one thing. Number one, I'm going to keep it real. I think we need new aesthetics as communists. That's why I don't throw up hammer and sickles. You know, I'm wearing red today, but it's not like, you know, it's got a cat on it. You know what I'm saying? It's got a black little cat jumping at you on some shit. I don't like a lot of the communist aesthetics that are put up. I posted on my community tab a video about the Marxist-Leninist Party in Belgium that's gaining steam, that might even become the leading government in Belgium. Okay? They're having a lot of success, and that's because they got rid of a lot of the old Marxist aesthetics and language that was unrecognizable or unappealing to people today. I suggest everybody go watch that video because I would really love to have a honest discussion about that group and if that's a successful way to build up a, you know, successful Marxist-Leninist party in our respective countries, no matter where we are. But yeah, I think we do need new aesthetics, and we shouldn't be afraid to experiment and to abandon some. You know what I mean? So I'll be frank. I'm a communist that doesn't like the hammer and sickle. You'll probably never see me with something that has the hammer and sickle on it. I don't think it's cool. I don't think it's wavy. Some people might like it. Some people might think they can pull it off. That's just not me. You know what I mean? You either see me in a suit and tie or you see me dressed up like Suge Knight in the summer, like it's 1996. That's it. Okay? By aesthetics, I mean it's not vibes. You're not doing vibes. I didn't lifestyle aesthetics. I didn't mean lifestyle aesthetics. Okay. You know what I'm saying? I do think visuals and aesthetics are important. I say we need new aesthetics, and we also need new vibes. You get what I'm saying? On my community tab, I posted a poll that said old wine, new bottle, or new wine, old bottle. And what I'm trying to do on this channel is put the old wine of communism and Marxist thought and revolutionary politics into the new bottle by, you know, my way of freaking it. and hopefully somebody else can do it, better than me. And I don't even think I'm being that successful, you know what I'm saying, with it. But I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it the way that I think is working. I'm constantly developing, tweaking, changing, trying new things. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah, I'm just trying to package that old wine in a new bottle. And I'm glad all of you agreed with me because that was the winning poll. But I digress. All right? So, the workers of the Putilov Wharf, and not they alone, were insistently urging Smolny to disarm the Junkers. If this measure had been taken after careful preparation, in cooperation with the non-combatant units of these schools, on the night of the 25th, the capture of the Winter Palace would have offered no difficulties whatever. If the Junkers had been disarmed even on the night of the 26th, after the capture of the Winter Palace, there would have been no attempted counter-insurrection on the 29th of October. But the leaders were still in many directions revealing a magnanimous spirit, in reality an excess of optimistic confidence, and did not always listen attentively enough to the sober voices of the lower ranks. In this, Lenin's absence too was felt. The masses had to correct these omissions and mistakes with unnecessary losses on both sides. In a serious struggle, there is no worse cruelty than to be magnanimous at an inopportune time. Okay, the page number is 1017. The page number is 1017. So what do we say when we're on 1017? Burr, burr, burr. And also, Pooh Shiesty robbed me. Pooh Shiesty robbed me. Ah! 1017, Brick Squad. Burr, burr, burr. Pooh Shiesty did it. Your Honor, that's him. He did it. He did it. Oh, man, I'm sorry. Anyway. All right. So James Wright says, it takes a while to build these things, comrade. I think you're doing great work. Keep your head up. I appreciate that, James Wright. I appreciate everybody who's joined in, who finds what I do valuable and also is engaged here. Okay. Kirkham Down says, we don't need to go off of what any one person said about certain things about Marxism. It's about the practice. In response to the shit about what Lenin thought. Okay, all right. Kirkham Down is doubling back to a comment over 30 minutes ago. He still want to argue with Nelson. You don't want to argue with Nelson. You'd rather argue with your girl, because at least with your girl you got a chance. Nelson will just go back and forth with you all day. All right. So Kirkham Down says, also nobody reads Marxist texts on live, so this is based. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying, man. I'm trying just to do my part and educate myself. This is my summer reading. Hopefully, you're also doing your own independent reading. Or if you've been following along, hopefully this text has been good for you. Okay? Keep in mind, once again, that volume 3 has some of the longest chapters in the book. All right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little break. I'm going to shut this live stream off, because we've been on live for over an hour and a half, and we still have about 20 more pages to go. So I'm going to do that in part 2, a separate live stream. We're going to pick up on page 1017. Burr, burr, burr. Pooh Shiesty robbed me. Burr. Snitching on a Zaytoven beat. Burr. Yeah. Oh, man. We're going to come back on live in about 20 minutes or so, read another 20 pages, and then call it a day. Shout out to everybody who, shout out to Kirkham Down Stalin. He said he just ordered Gabriel Rockhill's most recent book, Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism. Nelson Moreno, if there's a book that you should be reading, or a podcast you should be listening to, you should be listening to Gabriel Rockhill, and how many of these post-revolutionary Marxists, these, Soviet critics of the left, how a lot of them were paid by the CIA. I haven't read Rockhill's book yet, though I would like to. But I do think, Nelson, that would be very important for you, because I do think that a lot of your criticism of the USSR is not unwarranted. It's, of course, okay to criticize the USSR, but we do have to be aware of where many of these criticisms of the USSR stem from. A lot of it was propaganda that Gabriel Rockhill has exposed, that it was essentially CIA funded. You know, a lot of these intellectuals who were leftist, Marxist in name, were critical of the USSR because it was essentially, you know, warranted by the CIA. Okay? So, Nelson says, I saw Kirkham down Stalin on the Gucci robbing video. He was pointing the gun. That was probably him. Kirkham down, you know, he stay in Texas. So that's who, Pooh Shiesty, you know, Pooh Shiesty said, say son, brr, brr. We about to rob this rich capitalist. And all Kirkham down Stalin said was bet. I don't put it past Kirkham down Stalin. He got the opportunity to up it on a rich capitalist, a black capitalist at that, boy. Shit, I wouldn't have turned down the opportunity too. Shit. Hey, we about to run Gucci's jewels. We about to run his pockets. The only thing I would say is like, nigga, do not post it on IG. Do not post this shit on IG. Okay? Anyway, at an afternoon session of the pre-parliament, Kerensky sings his swan song. During recent days, he says the population of Russia, and especially of the capital, has been in a constant state of alarm. Calls for insurrection appear daily in the Bolshevik papers. The orator quotes the articles of the wanted state criminal, Vladimir Lenin. The quotations are brilliant and irrefutably prove that the above-named individual is inciting to insurrection. And when, at a moment when the government is just taking up the question of transferring the land to the peasant committees and of measures to bring the war to an end, the authorities have so far made no haste to put down the conspirators, wishing to give them the opportunity to correct their own mistakes. That is just what is wrong, comes from the section where Milikov is leader. But Kerensky is unabashed. I prefer, in general, he says, that a government should act more slowly, and thus more correctly, and, at the necessary moment, more decisively. From those lips the words have a strange sound. At any rate, all days of grace are now past. The Bolsheviks have not only repented, the Bolsheviks have not only not repented, but they have called out 2 companies and are independently distributing weapons and cartridges. This time the government intends to put an end to the lawlessness of the rabble. I choose my words deliberately. Rabble. This insult to the people is greeted on the right with loud applause. He, Kerensky, has already given orders, he says, for the necessary arrest. Special attention must be given to the speeches of the president of the Soviet, Bronstein Trotsky, and be it known that the government has more than adequate forces. Telegrams are coming in continually from the front, demanding decisive measures against the Bolsheviks. At this point, Konovalov hands the speaker the telephonogram from the Military Revolutionary Committee to the troops of the garrison, instructing them to make the regiment ready for battle and await further orders. After reading the document, Kerensky solemnly concludes, in the language of the law and of judicial authority, that is called a state of insurrection. Milikov bears witness. Kerensky pronounced these words in the complacent tone of a lawyer who has at last succeeded in getting evidence against his opponent. Those groups and parties who have dared to lift their hands against the state, he concludes, are liable to immediate, decisive, and permanent liquidation. The entire hall, except the extreme left, demonstratively applauded. The speech ended with a demand that this very day, in this session, an answer be given to the question, can the government fulfill its duty with confidence in the support of this lofty assemblage? Without awaiting the vote, Kerensky returned to headquarters, confident, according to his own account, that an hour would not pass before he would receive the needed decision. For what purpose it was needed remains unknown. However, it turned out otherwise. For 2 to 6 o'clock, the Marinsky Palace was busy with factional and interfactional conferences, striving to work out a formula. The conferees did not understand that they were working out a formula for their own funeral. Not one of the compromisist groups had the courage to identify itself with the government. Dan said, we Mensheviks are ready to defend the provisional government with the last drop of our blood. but let the government make it possible for the democracy to unite around it. Toward evening, the left faction of the pre-parliament, worn out with the search for a solution, united on a formula borrowed by Dan and Martov, a formula that laid the responsibility for insurrection not only on the Bolsheviks, but also on the government, and demanded immediate transfer of the land to the land committees, intercession with the Allies in favor of peace negotiations, etc. Thus, the apostles of moderation tried at the last moment to counterfeit those slogans that only yesterday they had been denouncing as demagogy and adventurism. Unqualified support to the government was promised by the cadets and Cossacks, that is, by those two groups who intended to throw Kerensky over at the very first opportunity. But they were a minority. The support of the pre-parliament could have added little to the government, but Milikov is right. This refusal of support robbed the government of the last remnants of its authority. Had not the government itself only a few weeks before determined the composition of the pre-parliament? So essentially what Trotsky is saying here is that, the bourgeois government led by Kerensky is still trying to go with the iron hand type of policy of putting down these rabble rousers. And, the choice of calling the people who have formed these Soviets and these militias and have become highly organized and militant, to call them rabble is the same way, MAGA was offended when Hillary Clinton called them all a basket of deplorables. It's very funny how liberals throw names at people who are highly militant and highly organized. And that's not me praising MAGA, but it is talking about how liberals tend to look down on the people. Liberals look down on the people. We as leftists, we look towards the people for guidance. We look towards the people for a better future. We just are trying our best to organize the people, to let them know that they are a people. You get what I'm saying? And so, all the people who claim to be socialists, such as the Bolsheviks and SRs, they are here saying, we'll defend the bourgeois government, but they don't even have the heart to say, that it's all falling to pieces. They're saying this, but they know that it's all done for. Anyway, continuing here. While they were seeking a salvation formula in the Mariinsky Palace, the Petrograd Soviet was assembling in Smolny for purposes of information. The spokesman considered it necessary to remind the Soviet that the Military Revolutionary Committee had arisen not as an instrument of insurrection, but on the basis of revolutionary self-defense. The committee had not permitted Kerensky to remove the revolutionary troops from Petrograd, and it had taken under its protection the workers' press. Was this insurrection? The Aurora stands today where she stood last night. Is this insurrection? We have today a semi-government in which the people do not believe, and which does not believe in itself because it is inwardly dead. The semi-government is awaiting that swish of the historic broom that will clear the space for an authentic government of the revolutionary people. Tomorrow, the Congress of Soviets will open. It is the duty of the garrison and the workers to put all their forces at the disposal of the Congress. All right. Shout out to Lemony Fresh Pine. He said, did I find a fellow communist? Why, yes, you did. You are in the right place. On this channel, we read books of all kinds, but we are now starting a series where we are reading classic Marxist texts. And right now we are in Leon Trotsky's The History of the Russian Revolution. We are in volume 3, nearing the end of the book. This is the longest book we've read in the Book to React series. It's been a fabulous text. I suggest you go check out the previous episodes. And welcome. I guess my question to you, Lemony Fresh Pine, what do you think of the October Revolution of 1917? As you imagine it in your mind, what happened on October 24th and 25th, 1917? How did it go down? Do you imagine it to be just this radical, spontaneous revolution that was bloody and fiery? How do you imagine it? How were you taught about it? What do you think of October 1917? All right, continuing here. So, this semi-government is awaiting that swish of the historic broom that will clear the space for an authentic government of the revolutionary people. Tomorrow, the Congress of Soviets will open. It is the duty of the garrison and the workers to put all their forces at the disposal of the Congress. If, however, the government attempts to employ the 24 hours remaining to it in plunging a knife into the back of the revolution, then we declare once more, the vanguard of the revolution will answer blow with blow and iron with steel. This open threat was at the same time a political screen for the forthcoming night attack. In conclusion, Trotsky informed the meeting that the left social revolutionary faction of the pre-parliament, after today's speech from Kerensky and a mouse riot among the compromised factions, had sent a delegation to Smolny to express its readiness to enter officially into the staff of the Military Revolutionary Committee. In this shift of the left social revolutionaries, the Soviet joyfully welcomed a reflection of deeper processes, the widening scope of the Peasant War, and the successful progress of the Petrograd insurrection. Going to Lemony Fresh Pine, he says, no, it was definitely built over decades. Revolutions aren't spontaneous. They require building a vanguard, and the state must suppress the proles enough to radicalize. Very interesting. Very interesting. This is the thing I've been going back and forth with as I've been reading this book. How much of, the disastrous war that Imperial Russia was involved in, how much of, the horrible working conditions that the Russian proletariat had to deal with, how much did the, unfair land distribution and high rents for the peasants contribute to the war? On one hand, we know that capitalism, no matter how good the living conditions of the working people are, is naturally exploitative. So I guess my question is to Lemony Fresh Pine and everybody else who joins, do we necessarily need to have horrible working and living conditions for there to be a radicalized, class-conscious, working-class movement? That is a question that I'm still wrestling with, because I argue that we are living through pre-revolutionary times in America because of the horrible living conditions we're living through. Prices going up, endless wars. The war is coming home. They have ice in the streets doming people. You know what I'm saying? Things are getting bad in America, but does that alone mean that that will be enough to radicalize people, or is that sufficiently enough? Because I believe that also propaganda, a working class group, or a vanguard party that speaks for the working class could be enough to radicalize people. For example, there's a Marxist-Leninist party in Belgium that's gaining ground, and Belgium is one of the, countries with some of the highest living standards in the world. It's part of that Western European bloc where they have free healthcare, free public transportation, and all sorts of goodies we could only dream of in America. What do y'all think? Are horrible living conditions alone or a large part of radicalizing the proletariat? You get what I'm saying? Because, I don't know, I think capitalism in and of itself and also a vanguard party that propagandizes can be sufficient enough. You know what I mean? I will continue here. All right. So, commenting on this speech of the president of the Petrograd Soviet, Milikov writes, probably this was Trotsky's original plan, having prepared for battle to confront the government with the unanimous will of the people, as expressed in the Congress of Soviets, and thus give the new power the appearance of a legal origin. But the government proved weaker than he expected, and the power fell into the hands of its own accord before the Congress had time to assemble and express itself. What is true here is that the weakness of the government exceeded all expectations. But from the beginning, the plan had been to seize the power before the Congress opened. Milikov recognizes this. By the way, in a different connection, the actual intentions of the leaders of the revolution, he says, went much further than these official announcements of Trotsky. The Congress of Soviets was to be placed before a fait accompli. All right, Lemony Fresh Pine says, I believe you can realize capitalism is a disease while not being able to treat it. We need a basis in Marxist theory to address how to change it. I agree with that. But we're talking about for the general, working class person out there. You know what I mean? I guess what I'm asking you, let's say you have a guy who has a middle class job, He's able to pay all of his bills and also save some money. Sure, you could also classify him as petty bourgeoisie. But just because somebody's petty bourgeoisie doesn't mean that we don't agitate for them to gain class consciousness. Because petty bourgeoisness, I would argue, is a type of false consciousness. You know what I mean? Petty bourgeois people are people who believe that they are, sufficiently benefiting from this system when they are also having their surplus value expropriated and exploited. So I guess the question is, could we radicalize even a petty bourgeois person? You get what I'm saying? That's the question. And once again, I am a, still growing in mind Marxist. I'm a student in sociology here in Budapest, Hungary. And, we are just now beginning reading this Marxist-Leninist series of books here. So, there's still more that I have to learn. But I would like to know what you all think. What do you all think about this? This is a very good topic. All right. I will continue here. The purely military plan consisted originally of guaranteeing a united action of the Baltic sailors and the armed Viborg workers. The sailors were to come by railroad and detrain at the Finland station, which is in the Viborg district, and then from this base by way of a further assimilation of the Red Guard and units of the garrison. The insurrection was to spread to other districts of the city, and having seized the bridges, to advance into the center for the final blow. This scheme, naturally deriving from the circumstances and formulated, it seems, by Antonov, was drawn up on the assumption that the enemy would be able to put up a considerable resistance. It was just this premise that soon fell away. It was unnecessary to start from a limited base because the government proved open to attack wherever the insurrectionists found it necessary to strike a blow. So Trotsky is saying here that essentially, the government, the bourgeois government, is trying to defend itself with a barricade and its last stand to make sure that they are still in power. And Trotsky is saying that we got hitters inside and outside. Wherever you move, we there. You get what I'm saying? I don't know if this was in Sun Tzu's Art of War. I've been quoting Sun Tzu's Art of War since we started reading this book. But it's very funny because I'm pretty sure Sun Tzu has in there something like, if you got the drop on your enemies in all places in time, you have already won. Like, that's eternal wisdom. And that's what Trotsky is saying here. So yeah, I will continue here. The strategic plan underwent changes in the matter of dates also, and that in two directions. The insurrection began earlier and ended later than had been indicated. The morning attacks of the government called out by way of self-defense an immediate resistance from the Military Revolutionary Committee. The impotence of the authorities, thus revealed, impelled Smolny during the same day to offensive actions, preserving, to be sure, a halfway, semi-disguised and preparatory character. The main blow, as before, was prepared during the night. In that sense, the plan held good. It was transgressed, however, in the process of fulfillment, but now in an opposite direction. It had been proposed to occupy during the night all the commanding summits, and first of all the Winter Palace, where the Central Power had taken refuge. But time calculations are even more difficult in insurrection than in regular war. The leaders were many hours late with the concentration of forces, and the operations against the Winter Palace, not even begun during the night, formed a special chapter of the revolution, ending only on the night of the 26th. That is, a whole 24 hours late. The most brilliant victories are not achieved without duds. So, once again, trial and error. Hey, it's a science. Revolution or insurrection is a science. The sweet science. So yeah, shout out to Lemony Fresh Pine and everybody else who's joining the live stream. Here is a question that I pose to you. What can we do to raise more consciousness amongst Marxist-Leninists on the science of insurrection? Because Trotsky has shown a differentiation. There's a strong distinguishing factor between revolution and insurrection. And I would say revolution is like sex. It's hot, it's sticky, it's romantic, it's spontaneous. You don't know when exactly it's going to pop off, but when it does pop off, it's pretty fucking cool. But insurrection is like giving birth to a baby. And that takes, many people coming together to make sure that that baby is born successfully. You get what I'm saying? and also along with the pregnancy as well, from revolution to insurrection. It's not a science as in it exactly happens 9 months later. And at any moment, that revolution can turn into an insurrection, a successful one, or it can be a miscarriage. You get what I'm saying? So I guess what I'm going to ask to the audience here is, what can we do amongst us leftists to focus less on infighting, to focus less on factionalism, to focus less on, celebrities within our circle? Who's right? Who do you follow? I listen to Bosch. I don't listen to Hassan. I listen to so-and-so socialist creator with 2,000 followers versus anybody who's not a Maoist. You get what I'm saying? Like, how do we focus less on, the discrepancies amongst us in personal ideologies that have somehow become like our whole personalities, and focus more on the science of building working class power and the science of revolution to insurrection? You get what I'm saying? That might be a complicated question, but what can we do? What can we do? Okay? So, after Kerensky's speech at the pre-parliament, the authorities tried to broaden their offensive. The railroad stations were occupied by detachments of Junkers. Pickets were posted at the big street crossings and ordered to requisition the private automobiles not turned over to headquarters. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the bridges were raised, except for the Dvorsky, which remained open under heavy guard for the movement of the Junkers. This measure, adopted by the monarchy at all critical moments and for the last time in the February days, was dictated by fear of the workers' districts. The raising of the bridges was received by the population as an official announcement of the beginning of the insurrection. The headquarters of the districts concerned immediately answered this military act of the government in their own way by sending armed detachments to the bridges. Smolny had only to develop their initiative. This struggle for the bridges assumed the character of a test for both sides. Parties of armed workers and soldiers brought pressure to bear on the Junkers and Cossacks, now persuading and now threatening. The guard finally yielded without hazarding a straight-out fight. Some of the bridges were raised and lowered several times. So very interesting what Trotsky is saying here is that, the government is, has their headquarters like behind all these bridges, and they're trying to fortify them. And the Soviet military men who are coming here to these soldiers who are protecting the bourgeois government at the bridges are talking to them, essentially trying to convince them that they should just give it up. You know what I mean? And eventually it becomes successful. The conversation with these workers, even though it's a little bit threatening at times, eventually forces these soldiers defending this government to give up the bridges. You get what I'm saying? So once again, I think this dissuades or dissipates many of our preconceived notions of the October Revolution, that it was just wildly violent and out of control, when really it was a sweet science. Okay? Yeah. Lemony Fresh Pine says, on a personal level, I've stopped adding modifiers. For example, Marxist, Leninist, Maoist, third worldist, etc. I just say communist. It eliminates wedges at least on a one-on-one basis. I agree. I totally agree. I totally agree with that. Yeah, I just think we should broadly identify as communist, not saying I am a Maoist, I am a Trotskyist, etc., etc. All of us have read something that brought us to this point. Where we are critical of capitalism and want to see a better world created. I don't think, unless you're dealing with, talking about the minutia of the criticism of capitalism or the best way to build a workers' party, the fine details, there's really not that much difference between us, like Sunnis and Shias, okay? Really, broadly, we're all Muslim. All of us godless communists are really just all Muslim. There's really not that much difference between us, like Sunnis and Shias. Like the average Sunni and Shia. The average Sunni and Shia doesn't, care or know that much of a difference between the two sects. You get what I'm saying? And so, yeah, anybody who is generally critical of capitalism, wants to create a better world, end American imperialism, empower workers, bring working class power to a state level, that's generally my ally. Anybody. Okay, and I don't care if you call yourself a Trotskyist, if you call yourself a Gonzaloist, if you're a follower of Enver Hoxha, you know what I mean? I don't care. Just, be on the right side. Be on the right side. You get what I'm saying? Shout out to Lemony Fresh Pine. You know what I mean? He's a pretty cool dude. He is a pretty cool dude. I would like to ask Lemony Fresh Pine, since he is so active, how did you come to Marxism, Leninism? How did you, because judging by the profile pic, whatever. How did you come to, I'm an anarcho-Biden. I'm an anarcho-Bidenist is hilarious. How did you come to Marxism, Leninism? What did you read? What were you exposed to? What were those experiences that brought you to, have a critique of capitalism and say that this is a correct way of organizing society, that socialism is better than capitalism, etc.? I would like to know. Just interested. You get what I'm saying? We're just chatting it up. All right, continuing here. The Aurora received a direct order from the Military Revolutionary Committee. With all means at your command, restore movement on the Nikolaevsky Bridge. The commander of the cruiser at first refused to carry out the order, but after a symbolic arrest of himself and all his officers, obediently brought the ship to the bridge. Cordons of sailors spread out along both quays. By the time the Aurora had dropped anchor before the bridge, relates Korkov, the tracks of the junkers were already cold. The sailors themselves lowered the bridge and posted guards. Only Dvorsky Bridge remained several hours in the hands of the government patrols. Notwithstanding the manifest failure of its first experiments, individual branches of the government tried to deal further blows. A detachment of militia appeared in the evening at a big private printing plant to suppress the newspaper of the Petrograd Soviet, Worker and Soldier. 12 hours before, the workers of the Bolshevik press had run for help in a like case to Smolny. Now there was no need of it. The printers, together with two sailors who happened by, immediately captured the automobile loaded with papers. A number of the militia joined them on the spot. The inspector of the militia fled. The captured paper was successfully delivered at Smolny. The Military Revolutionary Committee sent 2 squads of the Preobrazhensky to protect the publication. The frightened administration thereupon turned over the management of the printing plants to the Soviet of Worker Overseers. Okay? So, Nelson says, I think that people with a strong intuition, a sense that something is wrong with reality, can discover socialism almost intuitively, naturally, even if crudely. I think kind of too. I agree with that. Growing up, I don't know if they say the same thing, in your country, Nelson, but in America, people generally said, doesn't matter who you vote for, they're all billionaire puppets. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer. All the politicians are selected. The cards are stacked against you. If you're black, you got to work 2 times harder to get half as much. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, naturally there is this idea that we live in an unjust, unfair world economically, and something needs to change. I do agree with that. All right. Lemony Fresh Pine says, I used to be an evangelical libertarian. My first exposure to the left was actually Kropotkin. Eventually, I read Marx and Lenin, and it gave me the language needed to express my critique of capital. Very, very interesting. So we all come from different walks of life. I have some Kropotkin on my phone that I haven't listened to yet. It's like an audiobook of Kropotkin. Tell us about Kropotkin and what he's about, and how Kropotkin was your gateway drug to Marxist and Leninist thought. Very interesting. You get what I'm saying? Because the way that I feel like a lot of black Americans come into socialism is that we first get exposed to the Black Panther Party. We start reading, Huey P. Newton. And then we start finding out, okay, what is this Marxism thing? What is this Maoism thing? And then we do even more research. Then, for me, I found Harry Haywood. And then also started reading Marx and Lenin. I read Marx a long, long time ago. So, I had early exposure to Marx when I was like 16, reading the Communist Manifesto and another great book called Black Liberation and Socialism, whose author I cannot name right now. It's not coming to mind. But yeah, I think, there's different strokes for different folks and different paths for different people. But very interesting. What is it about Kropotkin that made him a gateway drug? Okay? So, Lemony Fresh Pine says, Blood in My Eye by George Jackson is my all-time favorite. That is a must-read. I listened to the audiobook of Blood in My Eye, and I got chills down my spine. I got chills down my spine listening to Blood in My Eye. And, you know, there's a lot of books that I'm embarrassed that I haven't read. You get what I'm saying? Like, I haven't read any, I'm going to be honest, I haven't read any Fanon. There's probably Fanon in everything that I've read because he's our granddaddy, you know what I mean, of black radical thought. You get what I'm saying? But I have not read The Wretched of the Earth. I have not read, you know, Black Skin, White Masks. You know, you get what I'm saying? So there's a lot of books I'm ashamed to say I haven't read, but whose influence is definitely in everything I have read. You get what I'm saying? And, yeah, George Jackson, I'm ashamed to say I didn't read that during my radical teenage years. You get what I'm saying? Because that was one of those books that was often mentioned. Often mentioned. Oh, man. But I'd listen to half of it, and I'm going to read it one of these days. Lemony Fresh Pine says, Kropotkin, as an anarcho-communist, spoke to the libertarian sensibilities, but I realized under anarcho-communism there was no mechanism to enact systemic change. Yeah. I don't think I ever had you know, tendencies towards anarchism, or I don't think I ever could, because I'm very convinced after reading Lenin's The State and Revolution that the state is necessary to get us to the eventual dissolution of states, where we no longer need states. But I don't believe, you know, like Trotsky said in this book, one of his funniest quotes is that anarchists essentially focus too much on one aspect of human relations, which is hierarchy. And I find that to be absolutely true. You know, anarchists tend to forget the other aspects of human relations and tend to focus on one that can be a bit exploitative and harmful, which is unfair hierarchies. Okay? So, yeah. Don't think I could be an anarchist. Though, generally, I see anarchists as allies in our fight against capitalism in general. All right. Continuing here. The legal authorities did not even think of penetrating Smolny to make arrest. It was too obvious that this would be the signal for a civil war in which the defeat of the government was assured in advance. There was made, however, as a kind of administrative convulsion, an attempt to arrest Lenin in the Vyborg district, where, generally speaking, the authorities were afraid even to look in. Late in the evening, a certain colonel with a dozen junkers accidentally entered a workers' club instead of the Bolshevik editorial rooms, located in the same house. The brave boys had for some reason imagined that Lenin would be waiting for them in the editorial rooms. The club immediately informed the district headquarters of the Red Guard. While the colonel was wandering around from one story to another, arriving once even among the Mensheviks, a detachment of Red Guards rushing in arrested him along with his junkers and brought them to the headquarters of the Vyborg district and thence to the Peter and Paul fortress. Thus the loudly proclaimed campaign against the Bolsheviks, meeting insuperable difficulties at every step, turned into disconnected jumps and small anecdotes, evaporated and came to nothing. Very, very funny right here. Very funny. That you arrest the police for trying to come enact an arrest warrant for Lenin. That's pretty funny. During this time, the Military Revolutionary Committee was working day and night. Its commissars were on continual duty in the military units. The population was notified in special proclamations where to turn in case of counter-revolutionary attempts or pogroms. Help will be given on the instant. A suggestive visit to the telephone exchange from the commissar of the Kegomsky regiment proved sufficient to get Smolny switched back into the system. Telephone communications, the swiftest of all, gave confidence and regularity to the developing operations, continuing to plant its own commissars in those institutions that had not yet come under its control. The Military Revolutionary Committee kept broadening and reinforcing its bases for the coming offensive. Dzerzhinsky, that afternoon, handed the old revisionist Petovsky a sheet of paper in the form of credentials, appointed him to the office of commissar of the Central Telegraph Station. But how shall I get possession of the telegraph station? Asked the new commissar in some surprise. The Kegomsky regiment is supplying sentries there, and it is on our side. Pesklovsky needed no further illumination. Two Ketgomsty, standing by the communitor with rifles, proved sufficient to attain a compromise with the hostile telegraph officials, among whom were no Bolsheviks. At 9 o'clock in the evening, another commissar of the Military Revolutionary Committee, Stark, with a small detachment of sailors under the command of the former emigre Savin, also a seaman, occupied the government news agency and therewith decided not only the fate of that institution, but also to a certain degree his own fate. Stark became the first Soviet director of the agency before being appointed Soviet ambassador to Afghanistan. Were these two modest operations acts of insurrection, or were they only episodes in the two-power system, transferred, to be sure, from the compromisist to the Bolshevik rails? The question may perhaps reasonably be regarded as causistic, but for the purpose of camouflaging an insurrection, it had a certain importance. The fact is that even the intrusion of armed sailors into the building of the news agency had still a sort of halfway character. It was not yet a question of seizing the institution, but only of establishing a censorship over dispatches. Thus, right up to the evening of the 24th, the umbilical cord of legality was not conclusively severed. The movement was still distinguishing itself with the remnants of the two-power tradition. So basically what Trotsky is saying here is that, once again, the Bolsheviks looked at taking over the Winter Palace not fully as just an offensive action, but a defensive action, because they viewed themselves as having true legitimacy, which a strong argument can be had. And this is me being a moderate. As a communist, I believe they had the ultimate legitimacy because they were speaking for the working class. But we have to remember that a mass movement does not mean that this is a majority of people. It's just a sizable amount of people, particularly of the working and peasant classes. Anyway, in the Bolsheviks' mind, and the Soviets in general, they viewed taking over the Winter Palace as a defensive action to protect the revolution and to protect workers' power. So they're trying to also walk this fine line of legality too. Keep in mind that there are people within the Bolshevik Party who still revere the state and, don't want to, fully smash the state. They might follow Lenin, but they don't really understand Lenin. So they're walking this fine line. They take over basically the media apparatus of the state and just censor it. So they stop the communications from the government saying that what's happening is illegal, this is a takeover, da 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 da. They basically censor it. They don't take over it. You get what I'm saying? Very, very interesting what he's saying right here. The sweet science of insurrection. Mwah. In working out the plans of the insurrection, Smolny rested great hopes on the Baltic sailors as a fighting detachment combining proletarian resolution with strict military training. The arrival of the sailors in Petrograd had been dated in advance to coincide with the Congress of Soviets. To call the Baltic sailors in earlier would have meant to take openly the road of insurrection. Out of this arose a difficulty that subsequently turned into a delay. During the afternoon of the 24th, two delegates from the Kronstadt Soviet, the Bolshevik Florovsky and the anarchist Yarchuk, who was keeping step with the Bolsheviks, arrived in Smolny for the Congress. In one of the rooms of Smolny, they ran into Chudnovsky, who had just returned from the front, and who, alluding to the mood of the soldiers, spoke against insurrection in the near future. At the height of the argument, relates Florovsky, Trotsky came into the room. Calling me aside, he advised me to return immediately to Kronstadt. Events are maturing so fast that everyone must be at his post. In this curt order, I felt keenly the disciple of the advancing insurrection. The argument was cut short. The impressionable and hot-headed Chudnovsky laid aside his doubts in order to take part in drawing up the plans of the fight. On the heels of Florovsky and Yarchuk went a telephonogram. The armed forces of Kronstadt are to come The armed forces of Kronstadt are to come out at dawn for the defense of the Congress of Soviets. Through Sverdlov, the Military Revolutionary Committee sent a telegram that night to Helsingfors, to Smilga, the president of the Regional Committee of the Soviets. Send regulations. That meant send immediately 1,500 chosen Baltic sailors armed to the teeth. Okay, the Bolsheviks are speaking in code like gangsters. Hey, bro, I need 100 of them birds. Say less. Eek. Send regulations. That means send 1,500 niggas with guns right now. Boom, bang, say less. That's gangster. I like that. Send regulations. That meant send immediately 1,500 chosen Baltic sailors armed to the teeth. Although the sailors could reach Petrograd only during the next day, there was no reason to postpone military action. The internal forces were adequate. Yes, and a postponement was impossible. Operations had already begun. If reinforcements should come from the front to help the government, then the sailors would arrive in time to deal them a blow in the flank or rear. The tactical plans for the conquest of the capital were worked out chiefly by the staff of the military organization of the Bolsheviks. Officers of the general staff would have found many faults in them, but military academics but military academics do not customarily take part in the preparation of a revolutionary insurrection. The essentials, at any rate, were taken care of. The city was divided into military divisions, each subordinate to the nearest headquarters. At the most important points, companies of the Red Guard were concentrated in coordination with the neighboring military units, where companies on duty were awake and ready. The goal of each separate operation and the forces for it were indicated in advance. All those taking part in the insurrection, from top to bottom, in this lay its power. In this also, at times, its Achilles heel, were imbued with absolute confidence that the victory was going to be won without casualties. So, very interesting what Trotsky is saying here. He's saying that, the people that are going to be leading this insurrection are the soldiers who defected to the Bolshevik side. So I have a question here for people like Lemony Fresh Pine or anybody else who's listening. This has been a prominent point throughout Trotsky's book. For the people that have been listening for a long time, you're tired of this question. But what do you think about propagandizing to soldiers and police to bring them over to our side? I believe one of the problems of the left, after reading this book, is that a lot of us automatically think all cops are bastards, when we apply that to the people rather to the institutions. Yes, the institution of policing is bastardly. Dastardly. And so is the institution of the American Empire. But the rank and file soldiers and police, should we be focusing more on propagandizing to them? Because Trotsky makes it absolutely clear that the Bolsheviks would not have been successful had they not had soldiers on their side. And is this something that us as leftists are just ceding to the right? Us as leftists, we're so nice, we like to give everything to the right. We gave the working class literally to the right. That's why you got poor white folks in West Virginia right now talking about, yeah, brother, send my money to Israel and take away my health care. Us leftists are so nice, we gave the working class over to the right. Now we're just trying to claw it back. Jesus Christ. But should we also try to get back the soldiers and the police? Once again, people who are probably more working class than a lot of other workers or people who proclaim to be socialists. Okay? Lemony Fresh Pie says, I can stomach soldiers, but cops not so much. I know. Trust me, as a black man from America, it's going to be hard for me to even be armed and lockstep with my brother comrades, police. You know what I mean? On that picket line. I understand. Trust me, I understand. And it probably would take a different person and a different personality type than me to propagandize to police. But in general, should we be propagandizing to police? This does not mean conceding ground on any of our beliefs. If the police if we're trying to talk to a cop guy and explain to him that working as a police is just as exploitative as working in fast food, probably even more because you can die doing your job in America, and they insistently try to make the job more dangerous and strenuous for them, and he starts talking about, well, black people are naturally dangerous, or these Mexican criminals are just out here bringing drugs and crime, and some of them are rapists. If they start talking like that, of course we're not going to cede that. We're not going to cede anything to fascist ideology. But I'm just saying, do we also have to propagandize to them? That's the question. Lemony Fresh Pine says a few of my comrades are vets and were radicalized through serving imperialism. Absolutely. Beautiful. You get what I'm saying? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, of course, being in Iraq and Afghanistan and seeing how these wars are essentially fought for nothing and wastes of billions of dollars would radicalize almost anybody. Everybody, or many of the people that I met who are in the military said, yeah, like, you know, we just did it for the Hellcat and there's no reason for us to be over there. We just did it for a Dodge Charger and I don't know why they made us go over there. You get what I'm saying? But yeah, once again, this is a question I would like to really consider. Really consider. Why is it hard to, you know, say we can stomach propagandizing to police? Because are they not the working class as well? You know what I'm saying? I'm not trying to cede any ground to the police, but should we propagandize to them? That is a question, okay? Anyway, the main operation began at 2 o'clock in the morning. Small military parties, usually with a nucleus of armed workers or sailors, under the leadership of commissars, occupied simultaneously or in regular order the railroad stations, the lighting plant, the munition and food stores, the waterworks, the Dvorsky Bridge, the telephone exchange, the state bank, the big printing plants, the telegraph station, and the post office were completely taken over. Reliable guards were placed everywhere. Lemony Fresh Pine says, can we ever really trust the cops? With all the psyops, infiltration, and subversion, it will make it difficult to ever feel safe with them in our movement. That's a very good point. Yes, that's a very good point. I understand. But, you know, I do think one of the issues, you know, is that a lot of us, you know, leftists, we have radical ideas and we believe that we're so radical and dangerous, man, that, you know, we just want to Fed jacket everybody. You get what I'm saying? You just want to instantly assume that somebody is going to sell you out or do traitorous work. I'm arguing here, after reading Trotsky's history of the Russian Revolution, I thought I was going to read this and say, I need to get a gun, I need to go and find my comrades and do drills in the woods. But after reading this book, I've just realized that to have a successful vanguard party, you just got to have great propaganda and organizational skills. And the weapons will fall in your hands. You don't have to do nothing. And most importantly, we don't want to be fighting because that's not our specialty as workers. It's not our specialty as workers. But guess whose specialty it is to do complex, tactical, military, and violent maneuvers? Police and soldiers. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, sure, we're propagandizing to police, and some of them might be trying to do counterintelligence or surveillance. But I don't think we should be so scared of counterintelligence and surveillance, because all we should be doing as communists in our parties is propagandizing. When it comes to staging insurrection, that is a different thing, and that is for, you know, a small clique amongst the vanguard to organize the insurrection. That's totally different. But the art of revolution is essentially the art of constant propaganda, is what I have been learning from this book. You get what I'm saying? So yeah, let these motherfuckers come into our organizations and report back that all we're talking about is, you know, making sure all the workers are trying to, you know, go on strike on this specific day, or all the workers are trying to, you know, make sure that we could take care of each other should one of us be fired or replaced for advocating for our rights. You get what I'm saying? Like, let the motherfuckers do that. Let them report that in the reports. You get what I'm saying? Sorry if I was off the rails, but that's what I'm getting. All right, Nelson Moreno says, depends on the cop. Drill time is absolutely necessary. We can learn ourselves. I think that there are certain things, you know, that you're specially trained for. You know, the bourgeoisie spends millions of dollars in their military-industrial complex because that's how they have to defend their power. You get what I'm saying? They have to defend their bourgeois states by investing billions in dollars to make sure that they have killers on their side. And so if we could co-opt their killers instead of having to invest to build the same infrastructure amongst ourselves, I think that makes more sense. You know what I'm saying? Now, James Wright says the police have been given the power of violence to defend and uphold the status quo. They are one of the greatest weapons wielded by the establishment. Their whole leadership will have to be replaced. I agree. I agree with that, man. I agree with that. I hope y'all aren't thinking I'm being reactionary here. I hope y'all don't think I have bourgeois thinking. I actually am coming from this from a very revolutionary point of view. Granted, Trotsky did not explicitly talk about the police getting, co-opted to the Bolshevik side, but I am conflating the soldiers, the Cossacks, as essentially the police. You get what I'm saying? They're the armed wing of the state to maintain the hegemony and status quo of the bourgeois, right? So, listen, yes, police as an institution are pretty reactionary, and they're meant to serve, the bourgeois class in our current time. But the working class people that comprise the police, I think those people are prime game. We need to stop ceding parts of the working class to the right. All of it is game, okay? All of it is game. This is what I have to ask. I'm asking all of you, from Kirkham Down Stalin to Lemony Fresh Pine to James Wright to Nelson Moreno, all of you, I'm asking you, are the police and soldiers working class? Are they a part of the proletariat or not? Or is it simply when you put on that badge and that blue uniform and put a fucking donut in your mouth, you're no longer proletariat? Let me know. Let me know. Am I wrong? Where did I miss that? Where did I miss that in Capital or German ideology? Where did I miss that? Tell me. Tell me. All right. Everybody, Kirkham Down Stalin is the truth. Lemony Fresh Pine says, awesome profile picture, can't corner the door. Oh my God, man. My guy's the truth. Hey, man. He said they can't corner the donor. Oh my God, man. That's how he became a commissar, just with that picture alone. He know that picture is raw. He know that picture raw as fuck, bro. Oh my God. Anyway, Lemony Fresh Pine says, I appreciate your perspective. I'll leave the propagandizing to the pigs. To those of us with more patience, it won't be me. Absolutely. Yeah, that's the thing. It doesn't have to be us. But I do think that this should be a part of the strategy. We just need to get some, we just need to get some of our more, how can I say this, our more like waspy comrades. We need waspy comrades who can talk wasp to that segment. You get what I'm saying? So, yeah. What about Kirkham Down Stalin says Russia versus America can be different though. I think agitating everywhere is good though. All right, are what you saying like the circumstance in Russia and the circumstance in America are different? I mean, granted, yes, our police state is pretty damn deep, and plus there is no national police force, and our police are derived from slave patrol, so there's that added element of American racism, which makes us exceptional. Is that what you're trying to get at, Kirk? So, yeah. Lemony says they're working class traders like small landlords, but their violence is more overt. Yes, I know. Selling the police, selling propagandizing to the police is hard as hell. It's like selling MAGA rap. It's like selling MAGA rap to black folks. Like, listen, man, the beats are fire. Just don't pay attention to the words. It's like selling Tom McDonald raps to, Public Enemy fans. You know what I'm saying? Oh my God, yes, I know it's hard to sell the police. I'm just saying, this is why we read theory though, and this is why we read history, because, this is a conversation that I haven't heard any other leftist talk about. You get what I'm saying? But I don't want to be known as that police guy. Don't jacket me as like, oh yeah, Simon Hill keeps it true. That's that communist that just really loves police. No. Fuck the police. Fuck the police. Don't do me like that, okay? Anyway. All right. Nelson Moreno says, in this age of information where digital territory is replacing real territory, propaganda is of the utmost importance. Absolutely. I agree with that 1,000,000%. It really depends on how the cop and the incentives they follow. Absolutely. Imperial versus core versus periphery, says Kirkham Down Stalin. Russia was not as linked to the other countries as I would say. it was easier to agitate along the lines of anti-imperialism because they had experiences being sidelined in the global stage. That is true. Trotsky did start the book off by talking about Russia being a colony or a semi-colony. So yeah, that is a somewhat difference. But I do think we have to remember that there are elements of America that comprise America. You know what I mean? Like, America is not a nation in the truest sense, is that it's comprised of different people who come from different nations. And we could argue black Americans, for example, are a nation within a nation. So we have anti-imperialism within the core of the empire. You get what I'm saying? Many people are drawn into the empire because they're the victims of it, thus carrying along, anti-imperialism within it. So I think it's easier to agitate in America, or somewhat, it has a different character to the agitation of anti-imperialism. Lemony says good cops usually quit. Maybe. And Kirk says, I think agitating among the police and the military worked and is a tactic that should be used. It always depends, though. Absolutely, it always depends. And I'll rest at that. You get what I'm saying? Like, I don't want to be known as that guy. I realized I just poked the hornet's nest, and now I kind of feel embarrassed. If I was white, I'd be blushing right now because I'm actually kind of embarrassed that, I might even be making a name for myself like this. Simon Hill, the communist that loves the pigs. No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't want to be known as that guy at all. Okay. Anyway. Meager and colorless is the record of the episodes of that October night. It is like a police report. This is what Trotsky said, not me. I didn't put in the police report sentence. Don't do that. All the participants were shaking with a nervous fever. There was no time to observe and record and no one to do it. The information flowing in at headquarters was not always jotted down. And if so, it was done carelessly. Notes got lost. Subsequent recollections were dry and not always accurate, since they came for the most part from accidental people. Those workers, sailors, and soldiers who really inspired and led the operation took their places soon after at the head of the first detachments of the Red Army, and the majority laid down their lives in the various theaters of the Civil War. In the attempt to determine the sequence of separate episodes, the investigator runs into a vast confusion, which is still more complicated by the accounts in the newspapers. At times, it seems as though it was easier to capture Petrograd in the autumn of 1917 than to recount the process 14 years later. So once again, similar to Chapter 7, when Trotsky says the February Revolution was kind of spontaneous, and there's a million stories that will never be known or told because there were like multiple events happening at similar times. He says the same thing essentially about October 24th and 25th, right? Like, there was a lot happening, and, as it was happening, not everything was written down correctly. And this is a very interesting admission from him, because Trotsky has been very, how can I say, anal, for lack of a better word. Pause, no diddy. He's been very anal about citing his sources and doing direct quotes about what happened. But when he cannot, say exactly who said this or what happened here, he openly admits it, which I think is very, very genuine of him to do this. Okay. All right. Kirkham Down has a good cop in his profile picture. Dog, somebody should make their profile picture Micah X. What happened, bro? What year was that? Like the 2010s. The 2010s was the pig merkin era. For real. They were merkin pigs. There was Micah X. There was Dorner. There was another guy as well in Baton Rouge, because I remember there was a guy in Dallas and a guy in Baton Rouge who started murking people like right after, I believe, Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown, around that time. Like 2010s, we saw some ill shit go down with, pig hunting. You get what I'm saying? But once again, was that actually effective, or did that actually just antagonize, the police to be more reactionary and more racist? You get what I'm saying? Like, sure, we like to see the empire get punched in the face. You know what I'm saying? But what's a better strategy? But then again, think about it. Chris Dorner was radicalized. That's the kind of energy we need. You know what I'm saying? Dorner was radicalized. Is that not an example of, what we would hope, to create. We need 1,000 Dorners on our side, not doing, Luigi Mangione bullshit. You know what I'm saying? Okay. All right. All right. Nelson says, in Portugal, the 25th of April, it was actually the military that sided with the people after a song on the radio. I think it was one of the few bloodless revolutions in history. And Socialist Party ruled almost nonstop for 30 plus years. See, I like that story, Nelson. Thank you for contributing with that very pertinent and relatable story to the topic at hand. Yeah, I believe that's called the Carnation Revolution in Portugal. Where essentially people were putting roses down the barrels of the soldiers who didn't shoot. And yeah, I do think, what Trotsky has been teaching us this entire time is that, a successful vanguard socialist, revolutionary party is one that does constant agitation, is keeping up with the working class people and their demands, and is constantly not willing to cede any segment of the population to the right. Okay? So there was no section that the Bolsheviks did not propagandize to. They propagandized to the Muslims in the Caucasus, to the rich bourgeois people, etc. They played the dual power, two-party, two-government game, etc., etc. Everybody they tried to propagandize to. You know what I mean? So, yeah. Okay, Lemony Fresh Pine says, wild boars are a real problem. Sometimes you have to call the herd. Remind them they're not untouchables. I saw this segment from John Oliver. There's this segment from John Oliver. I like to watch some liberal media every now and then. And he did a segment about the wild pigs taking over America. And that's what I was thinking about when Lemony Fresh Pine said sometimes you got to call the herd. Okay. And then Lemony says, wasn't the Russian Revolution also fairly bloodless, at least in comparison to many others? Yes, absolutely. That's what Trotsky is saying here. One by one, they're able to infiltrate the military. They're infiltrating the guards of the Winter Palace. Essentially, they formed a parallel government. You get what I'm saying? Like, a successful revolution is not us, fighting against the police. It's when, we're able to co-opt much of the police to our side. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, so to the first company of the Sapper Battalion, the strongest and most revolutionary, was given the task of seizing the nearby Nikolavsky railroad station. In less than a quarter of an hour, the station was occupied by strong guards without a blow. The government squad simply evaporated in the darkness. The keenly cold night was full of mysterious movements and suspicious sounds. Suppressing a sharp alarm in their hearts, the soldiers would conscientiously stop all passerby, on foot or in vehicles, meticulously inspecting their documents. They did not always know what to do. They hesitated, most often let them go. But confidence increased with every hour. About 6 a.m, the sappers held up 2 truckloads of junkers, about 60 men, disarmed them, and sent them to Smolny. Once again, a very cool story Trotsky is saying here. He put these workers on the road to stop all the cars. And these guys don't know what they're doing at first. They're just like, okay, can I see your ID? Next thing you know, they got the whole battalion, 60 military guys from the bourgeois government. They got them disarmed, naked in their underwear on the side of the road with their hands behind their head doing the Macarena. Shit fire. Okay. Shout out to Kamal joining the live stream. He says, we are back. We've been back. Okay. And shout out to Nelson Moreno. He says, John Oliver isn't that good. I like TYT, but they're generally doing almost anti-Semitic stuff and trying to bridge with Owens and Tucker Carlson. See, now we figured out why Nelson Moreno's so damn reactionary, kind of. He listening to TYT with fine-ass, racist-ass Anna Kasparian. If you're still listening to TYT in 2026, I don't know what to say to you, bruh. We still listening to TYT? Nah, bruh. Nah. We not jacking TYT. We not jacking TYT. Kara says, happy 4th of July to you. I salute your patriotic effort. I salute your patriotic effort to make the U.S. a better place and advance my education. That's gotta be sarcasm. My patriotic effort I was this close to burning an American flag today, baby. I was this close. All right. Lemony says Anna is also anti-homeless, racist, and a TERF. And she's sexy as hell. But yes, she is all of those things. Lemony is absolutely telling the truth. He just forgot to add the part that she a dime. Top of the line. Cute face, little waist with a big behind. Okay, maybe not a big behind. Anyway, Kirkham Down says, I'm dead. Anna definitely fell off. She fell off, but she ain't fell off in the face, boy. That's a dime. Top of the line. I'd still beat. Maybe she could be fixed. I don't know. I'd hate clap, says I'd hate clap. Anyway, man. Anyway, I'm done. Continuing here. Commissar Orlov received 2 authorizations. One to occupy the printing plant of the reactionary paper Russkaya Volya, founded by Protopopov, a little while before he became the last minister of the interior of Nicholas II. The other to get a troop of soldiers from the Semenov Guard regiment, which the government, for old time's sake, was still considering its own. The Semenovists were needed for the occupation of a printing plant. The printing plant was needed to issue the Bolshevik paper in large format and with a big circulation. The soldiers had already lain down to sleep. The commissar briefly told them the object of his visit. I hadn't stopped talking when a shout of hurrah went up on all sides. The soldiers were jumping out of their bunks and crowding around me in a close circle. A truck loaded with Semenovsky approached the printing plant. The workers of the night shift quickly assembled in the rotary press room. The commissar explained why he had come. And here, as in the barracks, the workers answered with shouts of hurrah, long live the Soviets. The job was done. In much the same manner, the other institutions were seized. It was not necessary to employ force, for there was no resistance. The insurrectionary masses lifted their elbows and pushed out the lords of yesterday. The commander of the district reported that night to General Headquarters and the headquarters of the Northern Front over the military wire. The situation in Petrograd is frightful. There are no street demonstrations or disorders, but a regulated seizure of institutions, railroad stations, also arrests, is in progress. The Junkers patrols are surrendering without resistance. We have no guarantee that they will not be an attempt to seize the Provisional Government. Polkovnikov was right. They had no guarantee of that. In military circles, the rumor was going around that agents of the Military Revolutionary Committee had stolen from the desk of the Petrograd commandant the password for the sentries of the garrison. That was not at all improbable. The insurrection had many friends among the lower personnel of all institutions. Nevertheless, this tale about stealing the password is apparently a legend that arose in the hostile camp to explain the too humiliating ease with that the Bolshevik patrols got possession of the city. So once again, they had the drop on all parts of the bourgeois government, and they had people on the inside. You get what I'm saying? From the janitors to the secretaries, people just let them in, open the keys, open the gates. Okay? Anyway, going to the comments here. Lemony Fresh Pine is lusting after Ben Shapiro's sister. I haven't seen her ass in a while. I just know she got, I just know she has some, she has great assets. Her future is in front of her, and it looks bright. Nelson says, Ben Shapiro is juicy. Oh, crap, I meant his sister. Nelson... Shapiro needs some estrogen treatment. Hey, if Ben Shapiro transitioned, that'd be a little baddie. I'm going to keep it real. If Ben Shapiro transitioned, that would be a little bad bitch. That'd be a little bad bitch. Little arm candy right there. I'm saying. Anyway. An order was sent out through the garrison from Smolny during the night. Officers not recognizing the authority of the Military Revolutionary Committee to be arrested. The commanders of many regiments fled of their own accord and passed some nervous days in hiding. In other units, the officers were removed or arrested. Everywhere, special revolutionary committees or staffs were formed and functioned hand in hand with the commissars. That this improvised command did not stand very high in a military sense goes without saying. Nevertheless, it was reliable, and the questions here was decided primarily in the political court. It is necessary to add, however, that with all their lack of experience, the staffs of certain units developed a considerable military initiative. The committee of the Pavlovsky Regiment sent scouts into the Petrograd district headquarters to find out what was going on there. The Chemical Reserve Battalion kept careful watch of its restless neighbors, the Junkers of the Pavlovsky and Vladimirsky schools, and the students of the Cadet Corps. The chemical men from time to time disarmed Junkers in the streets and thus kept them cowed. Getting into connection with the soldier personnel of the Pavlovsky school, the staff of the chemical battalion saw to it that the keys of the weapons were in the hands of the soldiers. It is difficult to determine the number of forces directly engaged in this nocturnal seizure of the capital. And this, not only because nobody counted them or noted them down, but also because of the character of the operations. Reserves of the second and third order almost merged with the garrison as a whole, but it was only occasionally necessary to have recourse to the reserves. A few thousand Red Guards, 2,000 or 3,000 sailors. Tomorrow, with the arrivals from Kronstadt and Helsingfors, there will be about triple the number. A score of infantry companies. Such were the forces of the first and second order, with whose aid the insurrectionists occupied the governmental high points of the capital. So, once again, I've said this on previous live streams, but I'll say it again. As I'm reading about the, insurrection that was planned by the Bolsheviks, I can't help but think about January 6th. And how January 6th we were this close to a right-wing sort of insurrection. I would say that it would not have been fully successful because it was sort of ill-planned in the sense that Trump is an idiot and many of the people around him are idiots. But it was actually very much in line to what the Bolsheviks did. They were taking over institutions. They had people on the inside. They had people that were sympathetic to the cause, and also, people that were very powerful with some level of institutional authority to back up the claim. And also, it was more than just running up in the Capitol with Confederate flags and Nazi insignia, but it was also the plan to have electors say that, they're switching their votes from Biden to Trump. You get what I'm saying? So it was more than just, the attack on the Capitol. The attack on the Capitol was the facade to hide the fact that they were going to switch electors illegally over and then have Mike Pence certify the election for Trump. You get what I'm saying? I've said this before and I'll say it again. The right wing is definitely reading our history. I do believe Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller have read The State and Revolution at least, or they at least have a deeper understanding of the October Revolution than most leftists even do, I would argue. Because a lot of leftists, unfortunately, have written off Trotsky. You know what I mean? When I first started reading this text, there were people saying like, oh, you become a Trotskyist. Trotsky was a revisionist. He was a reformist. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not a Trotskyist. And yeah, he has some fucked up ideas with permanent revolution. But he's still one of the most foremost Marxist thinkers. You get what I'm saying? After Lenin is probably Trotsky is probably the most important person we should be reading from the traditional canon. You know what I mean? Of people who actually did the thing. You get what I'm saying? And so, yeah, I would not be surprised if Steve Bannon, Stephen Miller, and the rest of the people who are behind Trump's attempt to usurp power have an idea of what it means to seize institutions and have an insurrection, as Trotsky would put it. But what do you think? What do you think? Do you think that what the Bolsheviks did is somewhat similar to what Trump and MAGA tried to do on January 6th? I am trying once again to apply everything that we are reading here to our present day and see the parallels and learn. Okay? All right. Kirkham Down Styler says we already have his sister. His sister is a butterface. Ben Shapiro's sister is a butterface. Just because she got some big old knockers, I don't think that makes her a baddie. Y'all too blinded by the light. Y'all too blinded by the memories, okay? Too blinded by the memories. The Khazar milkers got y'all going crazy. Anyway, Lemony Fresh Pine says, imagine you're a reactionary and you see Bolsheviks march and look around and nobody is stopping them. Probably piss yourself. Probably piss yourself. That's probably what they would do. Nelson says, in January 6th, I felt kind of jealous. They are really about it, unlike the Dems peoples. I mean, yeah. I mean, the more we look back on January 6th, you know, if you're a liberal, you look back on January 6th and you're just horrified and you're aghast. But if you've actually done some reading and if you're about that revolutionary life, you're trying to get inspo. Okay, where did they fuck up at? I think the good thing about January 6th is that we can look back on it and be like, yeah, we're going to do this better because we have all of our teeth and more of our brain cells. So, yeah. Bannon and Miller probably love Stalin. They study him lots, I guess. I would say Bannon and Miller probably love Lenin more, at least. I'm pretty sure Bannon loves Lenin. And Miller probably loves like some esoteric German National Socialist who got killed in the Night of the Long Knives. You know what I mean? Like when the Nazis cleansed out all the socialists of the National Socialist Party. There's probably like some Nazi who was a, you know, ardent racist, but also a stringent Marxist communist who has some obscure book that I'm sure Stephen Miller keeps in his vampire cave. Lemony Fresh Pine says, Dems have pushed respectability politics to the point of farce. They've trained their base to roll over and start negotiating from the middle. I'm not shocked they have no spine. So yeah, that's absolutely true. That's absolutely true, man. So I'll take a little water break. Y'all going hard. But what do y'all think? Do you see parallels between January 6th and, you know, the Bolsheviks slowly creeping and seizing the institutions night by night? You get like in the night they're seizing institutions one by one. And I think also this should make us like very worried, because how did Trotsky open this book? Most people didn't know that any of this was, well, not most people, a lot of people in Petrograd where this is happening were just going about their daily lives. They're taking their kids to school to study, you know, Latin. They're going to a ballet. They're out at restaurants. They're gambling, playing poker. This thing could happen in America. People are going to be, you know, watching the World Cup, playing Grand Theft Auto 6 whenever it comes out. At the same time, there's a coup at the government when all the institutions have basically been seized by the lizard people. You know, the Greys could essentially take over the government and people will still be like, bruh, did you hear that new Young Miami song? She's so ratchet. You get what I'm saying? Anyway, I digress. At 3:20 in the morning, the chief of the political administration of the War Ministry, the Menshevik Shur, sent the following information by direct wire to the caucus. A meeting of the Central Executive Committee together with the delegates of the Congress of Soviets is in progress with an overwhelming majority of Bolsheviks. Trotsky has received an ovation. He has announced that he hopes for a bloodless victory of the insurrection, since the power is in their hands. The Bolsheviks have begun active operations. They have seized the Nikolevsky Bridge and posted armored cars there. The Pavlovsky regiments has posted pickets on Milioni Street near the Winter Palace, is stopping everybody, arresting them, and sending them to the Smolny Institute. They have arrested Minister Kartashev and the General Administrator of the Provisional Government, Halperin. The Baltic Railroad Station is in the hands of the Bolsheviks. If the front does not intervene, the government will be unable to resist with the forces on hand. The joint session of the Executive Committee, about which Lieutenant Shur's communication speaks, opened in Smolny after midnight in unusual circumstances. Delegates to the Congress of Soviets brimmed the hall in the capacity of invited guests. Reinforced guards occupied the entrances and corridors. Trench coats, rifles, machine guns filled the windows. The members of the executive committees were drowned in this many-headed and hostile mass of provincials. The high organ of the democracy looked already like a captive of the insurrection. The familiar figure of the president, Chedsi, was absent. The invariable spokesman, Cesarelli, was absent. Both of them, frightened by the turn of events, had surrendered their responsible post and, abandoning Petrograd, left for their Georgian homeland. Dan remained as leader of the compromise bloc. He lacked the sly good humor of Trotsky, and likewise the moving eloquence of Tseretelli, but he excelled them both in obstinate short-sightedness. Alone in the president's chair, the social revolutionary Gotz opened the session. Dan took the floor amid an utter silence, which seemed to Sukhanov languid, to John Reed almost threatening. The spokesman's hobby was a new resolution of the pre-parliament, which had tried to oppose the insurrection with the dying echo of its own slogans. "It will be too late if you do not take account of this decision," cried Dan, trying to frighten the Bolsheviks with the inevitable hunger and the degeneration of the masses. Never before has the counter-revolution been so strong, so at the given moment. He said, that is, on the night before October 25th, 1917. The frightened petty bourgeois, confronted by great events, sees nothing but dangers and obstacles. His sole recourse is the pathos of alarm. In the factories and barracks, the Black Hundred Press is enjoying a far more considerable success than the socialist press. Lunatics are leading the revolution to ruin, just as in 1905, when this same Trotsky stood at the head of the Petrograd Soviet. But no, he cried, the Central Executive Committee will not permit an insurrection. Only over its dead body will the hostile camps cross their bayonets. Shouts from the benches, yes, it's been dead a long time. The entire hall felt the appropriateness of that exclamation. Over the corpse of the compromise, the bayonets of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat had already crossed. The voice of the orator is drowned in a hostile uproar. His pounding on the table is futile. His appeals do not move. His threats do not frighten. Too late. Too late. All right. Going here. Yes, it is an insurrection, replying in the name of the Military Revolutionary Committee, the Bolshevik Party, the Petrograd workers, and soldiers. Trotsky now throws off the last qualification. Yes, the masses are with us, and we are leading them to the assault. If you do not weaken, there will be no civil war, for the enemy is already capitulating, and you can assume the place of master of the Russian land that of right belongs to you. The astounded members of the Central Executive Committee found no strength even to protest. Up to now, the defensive phraseology of Smolny had kept up in them in spite of all the facts. A glimmering spark of hope. Now that too was extinguished. In those hours of deep night, the insurrection lifted its head high. See, this is the part of the Michael Bay movie where there's like a big explosion behind Trotsky as he stands in front of, like, you know, these bourgeois politicians. It says, yeah, we're taking over the government. Big explosion. Like, this is like, bruh, like what? Like, yeah, now it's mask off time. Now it's mask off. Anyway, the session, so rich in episodes, closed at 4 o'clock in the morning. The Bolsheviks, as speakers, would appear in the tribune, only to return immediately to the Military Revolutionary Committee, where from all corners of the city, news uniformly favorable was pouring in. The patrols in the streets were doing their work. The government institutions were being occupied one after the other. The enemy was offering no resistance anywhere. It had been assumed that the central telephone exchange would be especially well fortified. But at 7 in the morning, it was taken without a fight by a company from the Kek-Gomsky regiment. The insurrectionists could now not only rest easy about their own communications, but control the telephone connections of the enemy. The apparatus of the Winter Palace and of Central Headquarters was promptly cut out. Almost simultaneously with the seizure of the telephone exchange, a detachment of sailors from the Marine Guard, about 40 strong, seized the building of the State Bank of the Ekaterinski Canal. The bank clerk, Ralzovich, recalls that the sailors worked with expedition, immediately placing sentries at each telephone to cut off possible help from outside. The occupation of the building was accomplished without any resistance, in spite of the presence of a squad from the Semenovsky regiment. The seizure of the bank had to some extent a symbolic importance. The cadres of the party had been brought up on the Marxist criticism of the Paris Commune of 1871, whose leaders, as is well known, did not venture to lay hands on the state bank. No, we will not make that mistake. Many Bolsheviks had been saying to themselves long before October 25th. News of the seizure of the most sacred institution of the bourgeois state swiftly spread through the districts, raising a warm wave of joy. All right. Shout out to Edward Rosenet. He says, well done, bro. Keep doing what you're doing. I appreciate that. Thank you. But please do not call me bro. I am not your bro. I am comrade. I'm Comrade Simon, Comrade Hill, or just call me Simon or Simon Hill. But please, you are not my brother. You'll never be my brother. And on this channel, we refer to each other as comrades because we are all comrades in the struggle. We're all comrades in the struggle. Continuing here. In the early morning hours, the Warsaw Railroad Station was occupied. Also, the printing plants of the Stock Exchange, News, and Dvorsky Bridge. Under Kerensky's very windows, a commissar of the committee presented the soldier patrol from the Volynsky regiment in Kresty prison with a resolution demanding the liberation of a number of prisoners according to the list of the Soviet. The prison administration tried in vain to get instructions from the Minister of Justice. He was too busy. The liberated Bolsheviks, among them the young Kronstadt leader Rochal, immediately received military appointments. So, for any of the leftists that are listening right now, how do we feel about prison abolition? How do we feel about prison abolition? Because I believe that a lot of leftists now are waving the banner of being for abolition. But is this actually viable? Is this actually something we could do? Is it actually desired? Abolition of the prisons, the carceral state, etc. I don't know. In the morning, a party of junkers who had left the Winter Palace in a truck in search of provisions and been held up by the sappers at Nikolevsky Station were brought to Smolny. Podolsky relates the following. Trotsky told them that they were free on condition that they give a promise not to take further action against the Soviet power and that they might go back to their school and get to work. The youngsters who had expected a bloody end were unspeakably surprised at this. To what extent their immediate liberation was wise remains in doubt. The victory was not yet finally achieved. So for anybody out there who says the Bolsheviks are so bloodthirsty, here's a story in Trotsky's own words. You know what I mean? He caught a bunch of soldiers and he let them go. Let them go. Soldiers that were sent to kill him, and he let them go. And he let them go. I want to ask the people out there who are, anti-communist, who say the communists just bring blood, death, and destruction. Trotsky let these soldiers who were sent to kill him go. How many of George Washington's slaves were freed while he was alive? I'll wait. How many of Thomas Jefferson's child rape victims that he kept as slaves were freed while he was alive? I'll wait. I'll wait. I'll wait. Continuing here, Nelson says, there's many people I know who deaf should be in jail. Okay, I can somewhat agree with that, yeah. Finally, me and Nelson find a right-wing position that we both agree on. My right-wing brother in Christ. We found something we finally agree on. All right, anyway. All right. So, to what extent their immediate liberation was wise remains in doubt. The victory was not yet finally achieved. The Junkers were the chief force of the enemy. On the other hand, were the wavering moods in the military schools. It was important to prove by example that a surrender to the mercy of the victor would not threaten the Junkers with punishment. The arguments in both directions seemed about equal. From the War Ministry, not yet occupied by the insurrectionists, General Levitsky sent word by direct wire to General Dukhonin at headquarters. The troops of the Petrograd garrison have gone over to the Bolsheviks. The sailors and a light armed cruiser have come from Kronstadt. They have lowered the raised bridges. The whole town is covered with sentry guards from the garrison, but there has been no coming out. The telephone exchange is in the hands of the garrison. The troops in the Winter Palace are defending it only in a formal sense, since they have decided not to come out actively. The general impression is that the Provisional Government finds itself in the capital of a hostile state that has finished mobilization but not yet begun active operations. Invaluable military and political testimony. To be sure, the general anticipates events when he says the sailors have arrived from Kronstadt. They will arrive a few hours later. The bridge was really let down by the crew of the Aurora. The hope expressed in conclusion that the Bolsheviks, having long been actually in a position to get rid of us, will not dare come into conflict with the opinion of the army at the front, is rather naive. However, these illusions about the front were about all that the rear generals had left, or the rear Democrats either. At any rate, the image of the Provisional Government finding itself in the capital of a hostile state will go into the history of the revolution forever as the best possible explanation of the October event. Very interesting. So, the bourgeois can now only say, wait till our soldiers from the front come back. You're going to be really upset, mister. And they're like, guys, come on now. The guys at the front don't want to be at the front. We're doing them a favor. Continuing here. Meetings were continuous in Smolny. Agitators, organizers, leaders of factories, regiments, districts would appear for an hour or two, sometimes for a few minutes, to get news, to check up on their own activities, and return to their post. Before Room 18, the quarters of the Bolshevik faction of the Soviet, there was an indescribable jam. Tired to death, those arriving would often fall asleep right in the assembly hall, leaning their unbearably heavy heads against a white column or against the walls in the corridors, with both arms around their rifles. Or sometimes they would simply stretch out in piles on the dirty, wet floor. Lashevich was receiving the military commissars and giving them their last instructions. In the quarters of the Military Revolutionary Committee on the third floor, reports coming in from all sides will be converted into orders. Here beat the heart of the insurrection. The district centers reproduce the picture of Smolny on a smaller scale. In the Viborg district, opposite the headquarters of the Red Guard on Samsonevsky Prospect, a whole camp was created. The street was jammed full of wagons, passenger cars, and trucks. The institutions of the district were swarming with armed workers. The Soviet, the Duma, the trade unions, the factory and shop committees, everything in this district were serving the cause of the insurrection. In the factories and barracks and various institutions, the same thing was happening in a similar way as throughout the whole capital. They were crowding out some and electing others, breaking the last threads of the old ties, strengthening the new. The backward ones were adopting resolutions of submission to the Military Revolutionary Committee. The Mensheviks and social revolutionaries timidly shrank aside along with the factory administrations. The Mensheviks and social revolutionaries timidly shrank aside along with the factory administrations and the commanding staff of the troops. At continuous meetings, fresh information was given out. Fighting confidence kept up and ties reinforced. The human masses were crystallizing along new axes. A revolution was achieving itself. Step by step, we have tried to follow in this book the development of the October insurrection, the sharpening discontent of the worker masses, the coming over of the Soviets to the Bolshevik banners, the indignation of the army, the campaign of the peasants against the landlords, the flood tide of the national movement, the growing fear and distraction of the possessing and ruling classes, and finally the struggle for the insurrection within the Bolshevik party. The final act of the revolution seems, after all this, too brief, too dry, too businesslike, somehow out of correspondence with the historic scope of the events. The reader experiences a kind of disappointment. He is like a mountain climber who, thinking the main difficulties are still ahead, suddenly discovers that he is already on the summit or almost there. Where is the insurrection? There is no picture of the insurrection. The events do not form themselves into a picture. A series of small operations, calculated and prepared in advance, remain separated one from another both in space and time. A unity of thought and aim unites them, but they do not fuse in the struggle itself. There is no action of great masses. There are no dramatic encounters with the troops. There is nothing of all that which imaginations brought up upon the facts of history associate with the idea of insurrection. The general character of the revolution in the capital subsequently moved Masaryk, among many others, to write, "The October Revolution was anything but a popular mass movement. That revolution was the act of leaders working from above and behind the scenes. As a matter of fact, it was the most popular massed insurrection in all history." This is a little bit of white bias, I believe. This is a little bit of white bias, I believe, of Trotsky, because what was a more popular mass insurrection? The October Revolution or the Haitian Revolution? when literally all the enslaved people of an island rose up and defeated the British, the French, the Spanish, etc., etc. I'm critical of this whenever, this is brought up. Granted, Russia was and still is a much larger country in population than Haiti. But I would argue that, while the Bolsheviks were popular, they were at many times a minority. Meanwhile, the Haitians generally were wildly popular if we think about the people that were involved in, overthrowing their slave owners. But I digress. Trotsky says, as a matter of fact, it was the most popular mass insurrection in all history. The workers had no need to come out into the public square in order to fuse together. They were already politically and morally one single whole without that. The soldiers were even forbidden to leave their barracks without permission. Upon that point, the order of the Military Revolutionary Committee fell in with the order of Polkovnikov. But those invisible masses were marching more than ever before in steps with the events. The factories and barracks never lost connection for a minute with the district headquarters, nor the districts with Smolny. The Red Guard detachments felt at their back the support of the factories. The soldiers' squad returning to the barracks found the new shifts ready. Only with heavy work, with such confidence, the scattered government patrols, in contrast, being convinced in advance of their own isolation, renounced the very idea of resistance. The bourgeois classes had expected barricades, flaming conflagrations, looting, rivers of blood. In reality, a silence reigned more terrible than all the thunders of the world. The social ground shifted noiselessly like a revolving stage, bringing forward the popular masses, carrying away to limbo the rulers of yesterday. As early as 10 o'clock on the morning of the 25th, Smolny considered it possible to broadcast through the capital and throughout the whole country a triumphant announcement. The Provisional Government is overthrown. The state power has passed into the hands of the Military Revolutionary Committee. In a certain sense, this declaration was very premature. The government still existed, at least within the territory of the Winter Palace. Headquarters existed. The provinces had not expressed themselves. The Congress of Soviets had not yet opened. But the leaders of an insurrection are not historians. In order to prepare the events for the historians, they have to anticipate them. In the capital, the Military Revolutionary Committee was already complete master of the situation. There could be no doubt of the sanction of the Congress. The provinces were awaiting Petrograd's initiative. In order to get complete possession of the power, it was necessary to act as a power. In a proclamation to the military organizations of the front and rear, the committee urged the soldiers to watch vigilantly over the conduct of the commanding staff, to arrest officers not adhering to the revolution, and not to stop at the use of force in case of attempts to throw hostile divisions against Petrograd. So when people say that, the October Revolution was essentially a coup d'etat, or it was essentially Blancist, or that the Bolsheviks were maniacal, Machiavellian plotters of a, communist takeover, it just looked like that because they had already laid the groundwork for the institutions that supported the bourgeois government to be taken over by workers' power. Not even by Bolsheviks, but by the workers' power. Because remember, there's a difference between being a worker and being a Bolshevik. Okay? So, what Trotsky is saying here is that when the October Revolution went off, it wasn't a big firestorm. It was more like the lighting of a candle and then blowing it out. You get what I'm saying? Like, it was very, it was very intuitive, fluid, smooth, and easy because they had already done all the hard work of institution building. Very, very powerful and interesting. We're nearing the end, so if you have any comments or questions, put them in the chat. We only have about 4 or 5 more pages to go. Just letting you know. We're wrapping it up very soon. Once again, the chapters in Volume 3 are the longest chapters in the book. Like, each of them are like 40 pages. But we're still making progress. We're finishing this book by Wednesday of next week. I know it's been a long ride. Thank you for everybody who's been along. Okay? But yeah. Let's continue here. All right. Let's continue here. The chief commissar of headquarters, Stankovic, having arrived the night before from the front and not wishing to remain wholly inactive, placed himself at the head of a half company of military engineering students in the morning and undertook to clean the Bolsheviks out of the telephone exchange. It was in this way that the Junkers first found out who had possession of the telephone connections. "There is a model of energy for you," exclaimed Officer Sinagub, grinding his teeth. "But where did they get such leadership?" The sailors occupying the telephone building could easily have shot down the Junkers through the windows, but the insurrectionists were striving with all their might to avoid bloodshed, and Stankovic had given strict orders not to open fire lest the Junkers be accused of shooting at the people. The commanding officer thought to himself, "Once order is restored, who will dare to peep?" and concluded his meditations with an exclamation, "Damned clowns." This is a good formula for the attitude of the officers to the government. On his own initiative, Sinagov sent to the Winter Palace for hand grenades and sticks of pyroxyle. In the interval, a monarchist lieutenant got into an argument at the gates of the exchange with the Bolshevik ensign. Like the heroes of Homer, they exchanged mighty epithets before the battle. Finding themselves between two fires, for the time only wordy ones, the telephone girls gave free rein to their nerves. The sailors let them go home. "What's this? Women?" They fled with hysterical screams through the gates. The deserted Morsakai, relates Sinagub, was suddenly enlivened with running and jumping skirts and hats. The sailors managed somehow to handle the work of the switchboard. An armored car from the Reds soon entered the court of the exchange, doing no damage to the frightened Junkers. They on their side seized two trucks and barricaded the gates of the exchange from the outside. A second armored car appeared from the direction of the Nevsky, and then a third. It all came down to maneuvers and attempts to frighten each other. The struggle for the exchange was decided without pyroxyle. Stankovic raised the siege after negotiating a free passage for his Junkers. Weapons in general are still serving merely as an external sign of power. They are not being brought into action. On the road to the Winter Palace, a half company of Junkers ran into a crew of sailors with rifles cocked. The enemies only measure each other with their eyes. Neither side wants to fight. The one through consciousness of strength, the other of weakness. But where chance offers, the insurrectionists, especially the workers, promptly disarm the enemy. A second half company of those same engineering Junkers was surrounded by Red Guards and soldiers, disarmed by them with the help of armored cars, and taken prisoner. Even here, however, there was no conflict. The Junkers did not put up a fight. Thus ended, says the initiator of it, the sole attempt, so far as I know, at active resistance to the Bolsheviks. Stankovic has in mind a course of operations outside the Winter Palace region. By noon, the streets around the Mariinsky Palace were occupied by troops of the Military Revolutionary Committee. Members of the pre-parliament were just assembling for a meeting. The Presidium made an attempt to get the latest news. Their hearts sank when they learned that the telephones of the Winter Palace had been cut. The Council of Elders went into session to decide what to do. The deputies murmured meanwhile in the corners. Avksenstiev offered consolation. Kerensky has gone to the front and will be back soon and fix everything. An armored car drew up at the entrance. Soldiers of the Litovsky and Kek-Gomsky regiments and sailors of the Marine Guard entered the building, formed in line on the staircase, and occupied the first hall. The commander of the detachment suggested to the deputies that they leave the Winter Palace at once. The impression created was appalling, testifies Nabokov. The members of the pre-parliament decided to disperse, temporarily suspending their activities. 48 right-wing members voted against submitting to violence, quite evidently knowing they would be in a minority. The deputies peacefully descended the magnificent stairway between two rows of rifles. An eyewitness testifies. In all this, there was no attempt at dramatics. Ordinary, meaningless, obtuse, malicious physiognomies, writes the liberal patriot, Nabokov, of these Russian soldiers and sailors. Down below at the entrance, the soldiers inspected their papers and let them all through. A sorting of members and some arrests have been expected, writes Milikov, himself let out with the others. But the revolutionary headquarters had other things to worry about. It was not only that. The revolutionary staff had little experience. The instructions read, arrest members of the government if found, but none were found. The members of the pre-parliament were freely released. Among them, some who soon became organizers of the Civil War. So once again, for anybody out there who says, oh, the communists, the Bolsheviks, they're bloodthirsty, they're just going to slaughter us all. When the communists took over, they fucking tore up the government, they flipped over chairs, and they fucked my wife, and they, murdered people. Like, no, they literally let some people go. Trotsky could have killed some soldiers that were sent there to assassinate him. He let them go. When they ran up in the government, and there were politicians there who would later go and fight in the Civil War on the reactionary side, they let them go. So what does that say? That the communists are bloodthirsty or that they're too pacifistic? What is it, man? What is it? I will continue here. The parliamentary hybrid, which ended its existence 12 hours in advance of the provisional government, had lived in the world for 18 days. That was the interval between the withdrawal of the Bolsheviks from the Mariinsky Palace to the streets and the entry of the armed street forces into the Mariinsky Palace. Of all the parodies of popular representation in which history is so rich, this Council of the Russian Republic was perhaps the most absurd. After leaving the unlucky building, the Octoberist Shidlovsky went strolling through the town to see the fights, for these gentlemen believed that the people were going to rise in their defense. But no fighting was to be seen. Instead, according to Shidlovsky, the public in the streets, the select crowd, that is, along the Nevsky Prospect, were to the last man laughing. Have you heard about it? The Bolsheviks have seized the power. Well, that won't last more than 3 days. Ha 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 ha, Shidlovsky decided to remain in the capital. During the period that social rumor designated for the rule of the Bolsheviks, the Nevsky public had begun to laugh. It may be remarked only toward evening. In the morning, such a mood of alarm had prevailed that hardly anybody in the bourgeois districts dared go into the streets at all. At about 9 o'clock, a journalist, Nizikin, ran out on Kampanustrovsky Prospect in search of newspapers, but could find no stands. In a little group of citizens, he learned that the Bolsheviks had occupied the telephone, the telegraph, and the bank during the night. A soldier patrol listened to them and asked them not to make so much noise. But even without that, everybody was unusually subdued. Armed detachments of workers were going by. The tramcars moved as usual, that is, slowly. The scarcity of passerbys oppressed me, writes Nizik about the Nevsky. Food could be had in the restaurants, but for the most part in back rooms. At noon, the cannon from the walls of Peter and Paul, now safely occupied by the Bolsheviks, thundered out neither louder nor more gently than usual. The insurrection, but other proclamations were already making their way, announcing the victory of the insurrection. There was no time yet to pace them up. They were tossed out from automobiles. Just off the press, these handbills smelled of fresh ink as though of the events themselves. Okay? Nelson says, I would take Melania as spoils of war. I mean, that old hog. Would you want Melania, that used up Epstein Island broad? Why would you do such a thing to yourself? Don't do that. Don't do that. Anyway, companies of the Red Guard had emerged from their districts. The workers with the rifle, the bayonet, hat, or cap, the rifle belt over a civilian coat. That is the essential image of the 25th of October. Cautiously and still diffidently, the armed worker was bringing order into the capital conquered by him. The tranquility of the street instilled tranquility in the heart. The Philistines began to dribble down from their houses. Toward evening, they felt even less anxious than during the preceding days. Business, to be sure, had come to an end in the governmental and social institutions, but many stores remained open. Others were closed rather through excessive caution than necessity. Can this be an insurrection? Is an insurrection like this? The February centuries have merely been replaced by those of October. By evening, the Nevsky was even fuller than usual of that public life that was giving the Bolsheviks 3 days of life. The soldiers of the Pavlovsky Regiment, although their patrols were reinforced by armored cars and even anti-aircraft guns, had already ceased to inspire fear. To be sure, something serious was going on around the Winter Palace, and they would not let you through there. But still, an insurrection could not very well all be concentrated on Winter Palace Square. An American journalist saw old men in rich fur coats shake their gloved fist at the Pavlovsky, and handsomely dressed women scream abuse in their faces. The soldiers argued feebly with embarrassed grins. They were obviously at a loss on that elegant Nevsky, not yet converted into the prospect of the 25th of October. Claude Annette, the official French journalist in Petrograd, was sincerely surprised that these absurd Russians should make a revolution, not at all as he had read about it in the old books. The city is quiet, he calls up his friends on the telephone, receives visitors, and at noon leaves the house. The soldiers who block his road on Moika Street march in perfect order, as under the old regime. There are innumerable patrols on Milioni Street. There is no shooting anywhere. The immersed square of the Winter Palace at this noon hour is still almost empty. There are patrols on Morskaya and Nevsky. The soldiers carry themselves in military style and are dressed irreproachably. At first glance, it seems certain that these are government troops. On Marinsky Square, whence Annette intends to make his way into the pre-parliament, he is stopped by soldiers and sailors. Mighty polite, I assure you. 2 streets leading up to the Winter Palace are barricaded with automobiles and wagons. Here, too, an armored car. These are all under Smolny. The Military Revolutionary Committee has sent out patrols through the town, posted sentries, dissolved the pre-parliament, taken command of the capital, and established therein a state of order unseen since the revolution began. In the evening, the janitress informs her French lodger that telephone numbers have been sent over from Soviet headquarters, by which at any moment he can summon military help in case of attack, suspicious search parties, etc. As a fact, they never guarded us better. Very interesting. This French guy is a journalist in Russia on October 26th, like the day after the revolution. And he's like, oh, these Russians, they do not do revolution like in France. In France, when we do revolution, we cut the head of the king off in front of the whole crowd and then smoke a cigarette. And he's like, nah, things are pretty cool. Things are pretty decent. It reminds me of those white guys who travel to Afghanistan and they're like, bro, you will not believe I am here in Kandahar and it's so fucking beautiful, bro. It's beautiful out here in Kandahar. Man, look at that. That guy's just walking with an AK-47 with a big beard. I've never felt so peaceful, bro. That's what this French guy sounds like. He sounds like one of those YouTubers who goes to like Taliban-controlled Pakistan, and he's like, bro, this is one of the coolest, nicest, illest places I've ever been, bro. Whoa. Thumbnail, he's just doing this big ass, stupid ass face, and he's like pointing at a man with a big beard and a gun, and the thumbnail says like, Taliban, Afghanistan. Am I safe? Blonde hair, blue-eyed white man in the middle of Afghanistan. Anyway, all right. Shout out to Hall 9000 calling me good looking. I appreciate that. But that is not what we are here to talk about. We're not here to talk about my melanin is popping. We're here to talk about communism. We're here to talk about communism. So Hall 9000, I have to ask you, are we living through pre-revolutionary times in the West? Whatever country you're living in, do you think we are living through times where the contradictions are getting so high that people will eventually overturn this wicked system that sends people out to die for imperialism, that works people to the bone for the sake of capitalism? Do you think that we are near that? I digress. All right, final page right here. At 2:35 in the afternoon, the foreign journalists looked at their watches. The Russians were too busy. An emergency session of the Petrograd Soviet was opened with a report by Trotsky, who, in the name of the Military Revolutionary Committee, announced that the Provisional Government no longer existed. They told us that an insurrection would drown the revolution in torrents of blood. We do not know of a single casualty. There is no example in history of a revolutionary movement involving such gigantic masses being so bloodless. The Winter Palace is not yet taken, but its fate will be settled in the course of the next few minutes. The following 12 hours were to show that this prediction was too optimistic. Trotsky said, "Troops have been moved against Petrograd from the front. It is necessary at once to send commissars of the Soviets to the front and throughout the country to make known that the revolution has occurred." Voices from the small right sector. "You are anticipating the will of the Congress of Soviets," the speaker announced. "The will of the Congress has been anticipated by the colossal fact of an insurrection of the Petrograd workers and soldiers. It now remains only to develop our victory." Lenin, who appeared here publicly for the first time after emerging from underground, briefly outlined the program of the revolution: to break up the old governmental apparatus, to create a new system of administration through the Soviets, to take measures for the immediate cessation of war, relying upon revolutionary movements in other countries, to abolish the landlord's property rights and thus win the confidence of the peasants, to establish workers' control over production. The Third Russian Revolution, he said, must in the end lead to the victory of socialism. And that's the end of chapter 43. I'm going to keep it real. That was kind of boring. Like, it's very interesting because, you know, reading this book, you're waiting for like the big fight, which is October. You expect there to be bloodshed, rifles, and shit like that. But actually, what Trotsky brilliantly did, and what the Bolsheviks brilliantly did, is establish the institutions to take over the government without a single person dying on October 25th. You know what I mean? It was just a lot of wrangling. It was a lot of bolstering. It was a lot of, you know, politicking that essentially made the Bolsheviks successful. And that's what I take from that chapter. Kind of anticlimactic, if you want to put it that way. But Nelson says, "Simon, I think we need to read a book about AI and capitalism. Please, how much do I have to beg?" I'm thinking about reading the book Fully Automated Luxury Communism by that British guy whose name I forgot. I think that's about AI and capitalism. So anyway, this has been an interesting read. We've been on live for about 3 hours straight. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Let's go to the poll here in the horizontal live stream. So what was the decisive factor in October 1917? Winning control of institutions got 60%. Unsure but fuck Trump and MAGA with 40%. I like those results because that's the correct answer. Those two are the only correct answers. Let's go to the vertical live stream. Let's go to the vertical live stream, see what y'all said in the poll over here as we close up this live stream. Okay. All right, hold on. All right, let's see what y'all said over here. All right. When does a government, hold on. When does a government truly lose power? When armed forces stop obeying, got 44%. When it loses legal authority, got 0%. When it loses elections, 0%. But unsure, but fuck Trump and MAGA with 56%. That's the right answer too. That's the right answer. Right answer. All right. So, I appreciate all of you being here. Thanks for joining this live stream. It's been very fun in both parts. Very tiring, I'm not going to lie, but very worth it. As we inch closer to finishing this book, we only have 4 more episodes left. 4 more episodes left of the History of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky. I'm anticipating all of you joining in and contributing to the conversation. And y'all be easy out there. All power to the people. All power to the people. And peace.